Hey everyone, I'm Aftermoon Horrors. Before we dive into the story, I want to know, where are you watching from and what time is it for you? It's always fascinating to see listeners tuning in from different places. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy. It started on a Wednesday, which I remember because I was dreading double maths that morning. I was 13, sitting near the back of the classroom, doodling in the margin of my notebook, when a man I'd never seen before walked in with a folder tucked under his arm. He wasn't old, maybe late 30s, with thinning hair combed neatly to one side and a smile that seemed polite but strained, like it took effort to hold in place. He introduced himself as Mr. Harland and said he'd be our substitute while Mrs. Reese was on leave. None of us questioned it. Teachers went on leave all the time. But something about the way he looked at us, one by one, like he was cataloging faces, made my stomach twist even then. He didn't teach the way anyone else did. On the first day, he didn't hand out books or talk about equations. He said, "We'll be learning through focus." He'd dim the classroom lights slightly and have us close our eyes while he spoke in this low, rhythmic voice that felt like it vibrated through the walls. I remember the first time he did it, he told us to imagine a chalkboard and then erase every thought in our heads until only his words remained. It felt strange, but also comforting. When the bell rang, it was like waking from a nap. The next period started, and I couldn't remember what exactly we'd done. Just fragments: his voice, the faint ticking of the wall clock, and a feeling like I'd been somewhere else for a while. By the third session, I started noticing gaps in time. Not huge ones, just missing pieces. I'd open my notebook later and find lines of writing I didn't remember putting there, words like repent, witness, the child at the gate. My handwriting, but shaky, uneven. When I asked my classmate Megan about it, she looked confused. "You don't remember?" she said. "You stood up in class yesterday and started talking about a crime or something. You said you saw a man burying something." I laughed it off at first, thinking she was winding me up. But later that night, when I lay in bed, I had this image vivid as a photograph of dirt under my fingernails and a small, rusted spade. It didn't feel like imagination, it felt like memory. Mr. Harland always carried a pocket watch. He'd click it open at the start of each session, watch it swing slightly, and then begin to speak. His voice was gentle but commanding, like the kind that could talk you into anything. One time he said, "Memory is a door some of you will walk through, some will only knock." He'd stare directly at me when he said it. After that, I stopped making eye contact with him. But it didn't matter. Every time he spoke, something inside me leaned forward, eager to listen, even when I didn't want to. A week later, the headmaster called an assembly to say the real substitute, a woman named Mrs. Holt, had been delayed. He thanked us for our patience. That's when it hit us. If she was only arriving next week, then who the hell was Mr. Harland? The teacher seemed confused. The office said he'd been sent by the district. But when they called the district, there were no records. No one had assigned anyone named Harland to our school. He had forged every document: attendance sheets, classroom assignments, even a teacher ID badge that looked real until you noticed the photo slightly off-center. The day after that announcement, he didn't show up. Instead, our principal came into class, asking questions. What had he taught? What had he said? How long had he been there? Everyone tried to remember, but we couldn't agree. Some said 2 weeks, others swore it had been a month. My friend Jamie burst into tears because he couldn't remember what day it was when Harland first arrived. And all our notes were nonsense scrawls, half sentences, strange sketches of clocks and doors. That afternoon, when I got home, my mom said I'd been talking. In my sleep. She said I kept mumbling, "He knows what I saw." I didn't know what she meant, but later, when I went through my backpack, I found a slip of paper folded into one of my textbooks. In clean, tidy handwriting it said, "You remembered the river, didn't you?" There was no signature. The police came to the school 2 days later. They said they were investigating a disturbance involving an unauthorized individual. They took statements from everyone, including me. I told them about the watch, the voice, the paper. They listened, but their eyes had that polite skepticism adults wear when they think kids are making things up. Then one of them asked if I'd ever been near the River Clywydog. I said no. He wrote something down, glanced at his partner, and that was the end of my interview. A few days passed, and life started to feel normal again. Mrs. Holt arrived, an actual teacher this time, and tried to pick up where the syllabus had left off. But we were different, distracted. Some kids would zone out mid-sentence. Megan once stood up in the middle of class and just walked out without a word. I found her later behind the gym, barefoot, staring at the grass. When I touched her shoulder, she jumped like I'd shocked her. "He said to wait," she whispered. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt too quiet, and every creak made me think of that watch ticking. Around midnight, I heard a soft tapping at my window. When I pulled back the curtain, there was no one there, just condensation and the faint outline of a fingerprint. But on my desk, where I was sure there'd been nothing before, lay another folded piece of paper. "Come back to class," it said. I tried to tell my mom. She thought I was having nightmares because of all the commotion. She even called the school counselor. But when I met with him, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. He had the same type of pocket watch. He caught me staring and smiled. "Mr. Harland left quite an impression, didn't he?" he said. "Tell me what you remember." I wanted to leave right then, but I froze. He started swinging the watch gently, like it was nothing, and my eyelids grew heavy. I blinked, and the next thing I knew, it was dark outside. The session had ended, and I didn't remember a word. The next morning, I woke with mud on my shoes. My mom thought I'd gone out during the night, but I hadn't, or at least, I didn't think I had. But deep down, something was cracking open, like a hidden compartment in my brain. I started having flashes, a man digging near water, children standing in a half circle, chanting quietly, and that same phrase echoing in my head, "You remembered the river." A week later, the police came back. They found something near the riverbank. Human remains, 3 children, missing since the late 72nds. They were around our age. A name came up in the papers. Thomas Harland, former school teacher, declared missing in 1980 after being accused of involvement in the disappearances. The same face, a little younger, stared from the yellowed article photo the man who'd stood in front of our classroom weeks earlier. After that, everything spiraled. The school shut down for a few days. Parents panicked. Megan's mom moved her to another district. Jamie stopped coming to class altogether. The counselor resigned suddenly. They said he'd moved away. But one afternoon, when I was walking home, I saw him standing across the street, the same calm smile, the same pocket watch dangling from his hand. He didn't wave. He just mouthed. He walked through the door. I started keeping my curtains closed, sleeping with the lights on. The nights felt heavier, like something pressed against the walls. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, hearing whispers I couldn't quite catch. My grades slipped. I barely spoke to anyone. Then, one morning, my mom found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. She said I'd been there for hours. I had no memory of waking up, just a faint metallic taste in my mouth, and that phrase, always that phrase, looping in my mind. I begged her to take me out of the school, and she did. We moved to another part of town. For a while, things calmed down. I started sleeping again, making new friends, trying to forget. But memory doesn't let go that easily. Years later, when I was in university, studying psychology of all things, I came across a section on post-hypnotic suggestion. It said people under deep hypnosis can be instructed to forget or to act long after the session ends. My hands started trembling as I read. A month later, curiosity got the better of me. I went back to Wrexham for a weekend, just to see the old school. It was boarded up, weeds growing through the cracks. I stood by the fence, watching the broken windows, and part of me felt stupid for ever being scared. Then I heard it faint, rhythmic ticking, like metal tapping against wood. I turned, expecting nothing, but there was a man standing near the far end of the lot. His back was to me, but I knew that posture, that slight tilt of the head. He was older now, thinner, wearing a coat too large for him. The pocket watch glinted in his hand. I froze. Every rational part of me said to leave. But instead, I stepped forward. He didn't move, just stood there, waiting. My heart thudded so loud I could hear it in my ears. "What do you want from me?" I shouted. He turned slowly, and that same soft smile spread across his face. "You already gave it," he said. "You were the last memory I needed." The next thing I remember, I was back in my car, engine running, hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. I don't remember walking there or driving away. I never saw him again after that. But sometimes, when I close my eyes too long, I still see that classroom kids lined up in front of the board, eyes half closed, repeating words none of us understood. I hear his voice telling me to remember what I'd seen, to keep it safe inside me. A few years ago, the police reopened the case. They said they'd found evidence suggesting Harland had been part of an experimental hypnosis therapy in the 1,970 seconds before being fired. They believed he used students to reenact his own crimes, reliving his guilt through them, making us confess for him. They even matched handwriting samples from our notebooks to his old confession drafts. I gave a statement again, though there wasn't much left to say. He'd vanished, leaving nothing but echoes in our heads. Now, whenever someone mentions Wrexham or old teachers, I change the subject. I can't walk past a school without feeling that faint pull, that instinct to stop, to listen for a ticking sound. Sometimes, when I dream, I'm back there, sitting at my desk, and he's in front of the board, smiling that same hollow smile. "Close your eyes," he says. "Erase everything. Start again." When I wake up, there's always a faint indentation on my wrist, like something thin and circular pressed there during the night. I tell myself it's just from sleeping awkwardly. But deep down, I know the truth. You never really wake up from someone like him. You just keep remembering what you were told to forget. Before we jump into the next story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. We really need your love and support. It means the world to us, and you're the reason this channel keeps going. It started the day Jamie went missing. We were both 10, and we used to spend every recess kicking rocks near the edge of the playground fence, where the ground dipped lower than the rest. That corner always smelled damp, and the dirt there was darker, almost black. Teachers told us to stay away because the ground was unstable, but that only made it more interesting. Jamie was obsessed with it. He said there was a tunnel under there, one that connected to old war shelters from when soldiers used to hide supplies in the hills. I laughed it off until he started bringing drawings, pages full of twisting corridors, staircases, and arrows that led to a spot labeled with an X under our school. One morning, he showed me a new drawing, more detailed than the rest. The lines were sharper, as if traced from memory, not imagination. "I found it," he whispered, folding the paper before anyone else could see. "There's a way in." I thought he was joking until he told me he'd heard voices down there, men talking in low whispers, and something metallic scraping against the dirt. I asked how he could hear that if he hadn't gone inside, but he just grinned and said, "You'll see." That was the last time I saw him alive. When he didn't show up the next day, the teachers thought he'd run off. His parents said he'd been acting strange, carrying around a flashlight and extra batteries, always drawing at night. They found mud on his shoes even though it hadn't rained. The police searched the nearby woods, the old train tracks, and the creek, but no one looked under the playground. I wanted to tell them about the drawings, but something stopped me. Maybe guilt, maybe fear that they'd laugh or blame me for not saying something sooner. A week later, the school reopened the playground. Everything looked the same, except the fence corner where Jamie and I used to sit had been filled with new gravel. Still, every time I walked by, I swore I could hear a faint hum coming from beneath my feet, like the low buzz of electricity. One afternoon after class, I went back alone. The gravel felt loose, freshly packed. I kicked at it until I saw something glinting underneath a metal handle half buried in the dirt. My heart hammered so hard I thought I'd pass out. I pulled at it, and it lifted slightly, revealing a narrow seam, a hatch. I ran home that day, shaking. I didn't tell my parents. Instead, I waited until Saturday morning and packed my dad's flashlight, a chocolate bar, and Jamie's last drawing. The map showed a tunnel stretching below the old classroom wing, ending in a circle marked room. I didn't understand why he'd capitalized it until later. When I reached the playground, the morning fog still hung low, and no one was around. I pushed aside the gravel again and tugged the handle with both hands. The hatch creaked open just enough for me to slip through. The smell hit first stale earth, mold, and something metallic, like rust or old blood. I pointed the flashlight downward. A ladder made of corroded steel descended into darkness. I hesitated, then climbed down. My shoes sank into mud at the bottom. The walls were curved and lined with damp bricks. It was colder than I expected. For a moment, I felt the kind of fear that makes your hands tingle and your ears ring, but curiosity kept me moving. I followed the tunnel, my light catching on spider webs and old wooden support beams. The air got heavier, thicker. I passed graffiti in faded paint numbers, initials, arrows, and something that looked like a handprint smeared in brown. After maybe 5 minutes of walking, I heard it, a soft, rhythmic thumping. I froze. It wasn't footsteps, it was too steady, more like hammering from far away. I turned off the flashlight and listened. The sound echoed faintly, followed by a dragging noise, then silence. When I switched the light back on, I noticed something strange on the flashlight. Floor small, muddy footprints leading deeper in. Bare feet. My stomach turned. I followed them anyway because part of me needed to know. The tunnel sloped downward, ending at a door made of heavy wood, rotting at the edges. It had been painted green once, now chipped and covered in mold. Someone had carved words into it. Stay still. I don't know what made me do it, but I pressed my ear to the door. A faint shuffling came from inside, followed by what sounded like breathing slow, steady, too close. My pulse pounded in my throat. I was about to turn back when something scraped the other side of the door. Then a voice said my name, not shouted, just softly spoken, like someone calling across a room. Eli. My mouth went dry. It sounded like Jamie. I whispered, "Jamie?" And the breathing stopped. For a few seconds, I heard nothing. Then, slowly, the door creaked open by itself. The flashlight flickered, and I stepped back. Inside was a small room, more like a bunker with stone walls and an old cot in the corner. The air was freezing. The walls were covered in drawings, hundreds of them, all in Jamie's handwriting. Maps, tunnels, faces. My flashlight beam landed on one sketch that showed two figures standing over a third, who was lying flat. My hand shook as I looked closer. The lying figure had my name written above it, That's when I heard movement behind me, a rustle, then a soft crunch of footsteps on dirt. I spun around and pointed the light, but it flickered again. The beam caught something tall standing halfway down the tunnel. A man, or at least someone shaped like one. His head was tilted too far to the side, like his neck couldn't hold it up. He wore an old, gray uniform caked with mud. The light glinted off something in his hand, a long metal rod. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't obey. He took one slow step forward, dragging the rod along the wall. The screech of metal on brick echoed like nails on glass. Then he spoke in a voice rough and hollow. "You shouldn't be here." I ran. The flashlight bounced wildly, and I nearly dropped it. I didn't look back, just followed the tunnel until I saw the faint circle of daylight from the hatch above. My hands slipped on the ladder, and I scraped my knee climbing out. When I finally emerged, gasping, the hatch slammed shut behind me. I kicked gravel over it and ran home, crying so hard I could barely see. That night, I had a fever and kept mumbling Jamie's name in my sleep, or so my mother said. I woke up to police sirens outside. They'd found a body, or what was left of one, inside a drainage tunnel near the school. They said it was Jamie. His parents weren't allowed to see him. They told us it looked like he'd been down there for weeks, though he'd only been missing for one. The papers blamed an accident. The school closed for repairs. No one ever mentioned the hatch again. I tried to tell myself I'd imagined the man, that my fear had warped what I saw, but the drawings wouldn't leave my mind. The way he'd written, room, the way the voice had said my name. Years passed. I moved away, grew up, tried to bury it. But sometimes, certain sounds bring it back, the scrape of metal on concrete, the hollow echo of footsteps underground. About a year ago, I visited Adelaide Hills again for work. Out of morbid curiosity, I drove past the old school. It had been converted into a community center, freshly painted, new fence, everything cheerful. But the playground was still there, the same slope in the far corner. I parked nearby and walked over. The ground looked solid, no sign of the hatch, but as I stood there, I felt that same low vibration under my shoes, a faint hum, almost like breath. A man in his 60s came out from the maintenance shed and asked if I needed help. I told him I'd gone to school there decades ago. He smiled and said, "Ah, must have been before they sealed the tunnels." I froze. "What tunnels?" He laughed. "Old war shelters under the hill. Some kids got lost down there back in the 80s. One never came back." I nodded, pretending I didn't know. Then he added something that made my stomach twist. "Every now and then we hear noises from the pipes when it rains. Sounds like someone tapping from below." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the green door and the words "stay still." The next day, I went to the local archives to see if any official record mentioned the shelters. The clerk found a file labeled Adelaide Hills Storage Bunkers, 1942, 1945. It said the tunnels were built for supply, transport, and sealed after 2 workers died from gas exposure. Their names were listed at the bottom: Corporal James T. Burke and Private Eli S. Turner. My hands trembled as I read that last name. Turner was my mother's maiden name. I went cold all over. I asked to see the photographs in the file. Most were blurry, but one showed the inside of a tunnel with a group of soldiers standing by a door. Painted on it in bold letters, "Stay still." My breath hitched. The same door, the same words. And standing to the side was a man with a long, bent posture, his head tilted unnaturally. The caption read, "Caretaker, unidentified." That word, caretaker, burned in my mind because Jamie had once written it at the bottom of one of his drawings. "The caretaker watches below." I left the archives shaking, but I couldn't leave it alone. That evening, I drove back to the playground again. The sun was setting, kids were gone, and the maintenance man had left. I walked to the corner, knelt, and brushed away the top layer of gravel. My fingers hit something hard, a piece of rusted metal. My chest tightened. I scraped around it until I saw the faint outline of the hatch. Against every instinct, I pulled it open. The smell was the same wet earth and rust. The ladder looked newer though, like someone had replaced it recently. I climbed down, telling myself it was just to face my fear, to prove there was nothing there. The tunnel looked smaller, walls closer together. I walked slowly, my flashlight beam steady. After a few meters, I saw something on the ground, a small, folded paper, yellowed at the edges. I picked it up. It was one of Jamie's drawings, the same one he'd shown me before he vanished. But this time, there was an extra mark, a new arrow drawn from the room back toward the surface, ending right where I stood. Beside it, written in shaky pencil, "He's following you now." The flashlight went out. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then behind me, the same dragging sound I'd heard years ago scraped along the wall. I turned and saw a faint glow, a lantern, maybe 20 feet away, moving closer. A voice, calm and low, said, "You came back." I ran. The tunnel seemed endless. My foot slipped in mud, but I didn't stop until I hit the ladder and climbed, with everything I had. When I reached the surface, the hatch slammed shut beneath me on its own. I fell backward into the gravel, gasping, heart thundering. But when I looked down, the hatch was gone again, buried completely as if it had never been there. I drove all night, shaking so badly I had to pull over twice. By morning, I was miles away, but I couldn't stop replaying the voice. I swear it wasn't angry, it sounded almost relieved, like it had been waiting. The next week, I mailed the drawing to a local historian anonymously with a note. "Seal it for good." They never replied. Maybe they thought it was a prank, maybe it's still open. Sometimes, late at night, when I close my eyes, I can still feel the cold air of that tunnel and hear the quiet hum beneath my feet. And every now and then, just as I'm drifting off, I hear that voice again, close, patient, whispering my name from below, as if reminding me, some doors never stay sealed. It started with a single drawing left on my desk, the kind of thing any primary school teacher in a small Scottish town might overlook. Crayon lines, bright colors, a child's world made simple. But when I looked closer, I felt my stomach tighten. It wasn't the usual stick figures or smiling suns. It was something else. A street corner, I recognized Church Lane drawn in careful detail, down to the cobblestone pattern, and in the middle of it, a red figure lying in a pool of scribbled crimson. Beside it, a smaller shape, black and thin, holding what looked like a stick. I remember sitting there long after class ended, turning the paper in my hands. It had been drawn by Callum, one of my quietest students. 8 years old, soft-spoken, always sitting by the window. He didn't play much with the other children. When I asked him about the drawing that day, he only said, "It's what I saw," before tucking his chin down and going back to sharpening his pencil. That night, I couldn't get the image out of my mind. The next morning, the news spread through Inverness like a chill, a man found dead near Church Lane. The details were vague, but when I heard where it happened, my chest felt heavy. I went to school that day, pretending everything was normal. Callum came in wearing his oversized jumper, carrying his little folder of papers as always. I tried not to look at him differently, but every time I caught his eyes, I felt something stir, not fear exactly, but unease, like he knew something I didn't. A week passed, and I convinced myself it was a coincidence. Kids draw strange things all the time. Maybe he overheard adults talking about crime, or maybe he had just imagined it. But then, another drawing appeared. This time he handed it to me himself during art hour, as if proud. It showed a riverbank with two figures near the water. One was small, standing, while the other lay on the grass again in red. He'd even shaded, in the trees and the bridge, at the top of the paper. I recognized the spot instantly. The banks near the Ness River, not far from the bakery I passed every morning. I didn't want to overreact, but my pulse jumped. "Callum," I asked gently, "where did you get this idea?" He looked up at me, his little face expressionless. "I saw it when I closed my eyes last night," he said softly. The man was sad because he couldn't breathe, so I drew him. I told myself it was imagination. Children absorb news stories and nightmares and twist them into pictures. Still, that evening, when I walked home, I couldn't help detouring to the riverbank. Police tape fluttered by the bridge. I stopped dead. A small crowd had gathered. Another murder. A man found by the water, throat cut, no witnesses. I didn't sleep that night. The coincidence had turned into something darker, something that gnawed at my mind. The next morning, I called the police station, asked to speak with whoever handled the case. I didn't give details, just said one of my students had drawn something that worried me. The officer on the line sounded polite but distracted. "We've had plenty of tips, ma'am," he said. "Kids draw all sorts of nonsense. Try not to scare him, all right?" I hung up feeling foolish, yet that same day, Callum was unusually quiet. He didn't draw, he didn't speak, just stared out the window while the others worked on their math sheets. When I went over, I noticed his hands trembling slightly. "Are you all right, Callum?" I asked. He looked up, tears welling. "I didn't mean to make it happen," he whispered. That sentence still echoes in my head. I crouched beside him, heart pounding. "What do you mean?" He shook his head. "When I draw them, they stop moving. I tried not to draw last night, but it comes anyway. It makes me see." I didn't know what to say. Children invent stories all the time, but something about the conviction in his voice froze me. That afternoon, after the final bell, I searched through his desk. I knew it was wrong, but my hands were shaking. Inside, I found a small stack of papers all filled with drawings. Each one was precise, disturbingly detailed. I recognized places all over Inverness: the post office, the car park near the pub, even the back of our own school building. In every picture, there was someone hurt. Some were people I recognized: the postman, the shopkeeper from the corner. All dead, all drawn in that same messy red crayon. That night, I didn't eat, didn't read, didn't do anything but stare at the pile of drawings I'd taken home. Something was wrong with that boy. But what if it wasn't him doing it? What if he was just seeing it before it happened? The next morning, I confronted him gently before class began. "Callum, can you tell me why you draw these things?" I asked. He looked down. "It stops when I draw them. If I don't, it happens again." "What happens again?" He hesitated, then said, "The eyes." "The eyes?" He nodded, voice trembling. "At night, they show me. A man stands at the end of my bed and makes me watch. He says I have to remember for him, so I draw it. He says if I stop, he'll come for Mum." I felt cold all over. "Who is he?" "He doesn't have a name," Callum whispered. "Just the eyes. He's in the pictures too." I felt my breath catch. I flipped through his folder again. In every picture, somewhere hidden, there was indeed a small figure in black. In some, behind trees; in others, reflected in a window or standing far off in the background. I hadn't noticed before. I tried to tell myself it was just a disturbed imagination. Maybe trauma, maybe someone hurting him. I went to the headmaster, showed him the drawings. He frowned, uncomfortable, and said, "Perhaps it's best to let the authorities handle this. We can't jump to conclusions." But by the time they agreed, To arrange a home visit, another murder had happened this time. A woman walking home from work, near the same bakery again. And in Callum's folder the next morning was another drawing the same bridge, same woman, drawn before the news broke. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I went straight to the police with everything I had, the drawings, the timeline, the child's statements. They looked skeptical but listened. The detective, a middle-aged man named Fraser, took the papers and sighed. "We'll check it out. Maybe the lad's hearing things at home." "Don't worry, miss." He paused, reading my badge. "Miss Lennox. We'll handle it." But that night, something happened I still can't explain. Around midnight, I woke to knocking at my door, slow, deliberate. 3 knocks, pause, 3 again. I hesitated, thinking maybe it was a drunk neighbor. But when I peered through the peephole, no one was there. I went back to bed uneasy. And when I arrived at school, the next morning, Callum wasn't there. His seat by the window sat empty, his pencils still neatly aligned. The headmaster called me into his office mid-morning. "They can't find him," he said grimly. "His mother reported him missing last night." I felt my knees weaken. I left work early and went straight to the police. They were already searching. By evening, the town buzzed with rumors, sightings near the river, strange figures in alleys. I waited up all night. 2 days later, they found him, not alive. His body was discovered in a drainage ditch outside town, curled up, still clutching a crayon in one small hand. The official story said he'd wandered off and drowned, but I knew better. The last drawing he'd made was found in his satchel. It showed the ditch, and in the corner of the page, the small black figure stood again, closer this time, its hand on the boy's shoulder. I should have stopped there. I should have burned everything and tried to forget. But guilt makes you do foolish things. I kept the folder hidden in my flat. Weeks passed. Life moved on, or at least pretended to. Then one evening, I received a letter, no return address. Just my name, written in a child's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Another drawing. My flat's hallway, drawn from the front door. And there I was, standing in the middle of it, red around my neck. The same black figure stood behind me. I froze. I tore through my flat, checking every lock, every window. Nothing. But that night, I couldn't breathe. I dreamed of Callum standing by my bed, whispering, "He knows you have them." The next morning, I found the crayon folder lying open on my table, though I had locked it in a drawer the night before. A new drawing was inside. This one was half finished, a face taking shape in red lines. My face. I felt my sanity slipping. I went straight to Detective Fraser, demanded they reopen the case. He looked uneasy when I told him about the new drawings. "Miss Lennox, with respect," he said, "the boy's gone. You've been through a lot. Maybe you should take time off." I did. I left town for a while, stayed with my sister in Aberdeen. For months, nothing happened. I started to believe it had all been my mind trying to process grief. But when I returned to Inverness to pack my old things, the nightmares came back. That same feeling being watched, that prickling behind the neck. I tried to ignore it until one morning, I noticed something strange outside my window. A man standing across the street, staring up at my flat. He wore a black coat, motionless. I blinked, and he was gone. I went downstairs, shaken, and as I passed the mailbox, something white caught my eye. Another envelope, no stamp this time. Inside was one more drawing, the school, with every classroom labeled in a child's hand. Mine had a red X across it. That was when I realized it wasn't over. Callum's mother moved away shortly after his death, and I never saw her again. The police called it grief-induced paranoia, but I started keeping records of everything, every knock, every shadow, every letter. They came less frequently, but they never stopped. Sometimes just a blank page with the faint outline of a figure drawn in pencil. It's been years now. I've learned to live with it, though I still flinch when I see children drawing. Every classroom I visit, I check their papers without meaning to. I've moved twice, changed jobs, changed my number. Yet every few months, an envelope finds me, no matter where I go. The last one came 3 nights ago. It wasn't a drawing this time, just a single sentence, written in that same uneven, childlike script. You stopped watching, so he came back. And beneath it, smeared faintly in red, was the print of a small hand. Which story setting scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. I still remember the first time I saw him standing behind that pastel blue ice cream van on the corner of Orikatu, humming an old Finnish tune as he scooped vanilla into a cone. Kids lined up around him, their coins clinking against the counter, their laughter blending with the soft jingle from the van's little bell. Everyone in Turku knew him as Jarmo the Ice Cream Man. I knew him as a summer constant, the same way you know the smell of fresh asphalt after rain or the sound of church bells on a Sunday morning. He was harmless. Or at least, that's what I thought when I started writing about him. Back then, in 1982, I was 26, working as a junior journalist for Turun Sanomat. My editor, Mika, handed me what he called a soft story, a profile on local small businesses. I was frustrated because I wanted to write about the real issues: missing children, rising unemployment, the quiet fear that had crept into our town. In 3 months, 4 children had vanished, all under the age of 10. The police called them unrelated disappearances, but everyone in Turku had their doubts. Still, I took the assignment. I figured maybe, if I interviewed enough locals, I could stumble into something bigger. When I met Jarmo, he was wiping down his counter, humming that same tune. His van was parked near the river, painted with cheerful illustrations, polar bears and penguins holding cones. "You must be the writer," he said in Finnish, his accent oddly precise, his tone almost rehearsed. "People don't usually write about ice cream." I smiled politely, notebook in hand. He was friendly, perhaps too much so. He spoke in long, flowing sentences about the joy of flavor, about memories melting faster than ice. His eyes, pale gray like diluted frost, barely blinked as he talked. Something about his manner unsettled me. Maybe it was the way he said children had pure taste buds, or how he called them his most loyal customers. But in a town like ours, people trusted kindness easily. He gave me a sample, a scoop of raspberry called Sunday Smile. It tasted strange, metallic almost, like the aftertaste of biting your tongue. I chalked it up to nerves and finished the interview, promising him a feature spot the next week. Later that night, I was typing up notes when I saw something odd in my recorder. Between our conversation, there was a faint whisper, a child's voice saying, "Don't." I replayed it several times. It could have been a background noise, but I hadn't noticed any children nearby. That whisper looped in my head the whole night. The next morning, I went to Jarmo's van again under the pretext of fact-checking. He greeted me warmly, same as before. I asked if he kept business records. "Of course," he said proudly, pulling out a small leather ledger from beneath the counter. The pages were lined with dates, names of ice cream flavors, and what I assumed were prices. Strawberry Dream, 6.5, Lemon Sun, 5, Cherry Road, 7. Nothing suspicious, except one detail. Next to certain flavors, he had drawn small circles. Some were filled in, some weren't. I asked what they meant. He smiled thinly. "That's my inventory system. Full means sold out, empty means I have more." It made sense, but I copied down a few lines anyway. I didn't know why. Instinct, maybe. Back at the office, I compared those dates to the police reports pinned on our board. That's when my stomach turned. Each date matched a child's disappearance. Every missing child's date coincided with one of his flavors of the day. The first was Blueberry Bell, the day a girl named Alina vanished from her school route. The second, Peach Kiss, the day a boy named Timo disappeared after soccer practice. The pattern continued for 4 children. I tried to tell Mika, my editor, but he brushed it off. Coincidence, Jonas, you're seeing ghosts in grocery lists. He told me to finish the soft story and leave the detective work to the police. But that ledger, it kept haunting me. I couldn't unsee it. That weekend, I visited Jarmo again, pretending I wanted to write a follow-up about his famous recipes. He welcomed me like an old friend. Inside the van, the air smelled too sweet, like burnt sugar masking something sour beneath. He showed me his flavor fridge, rows of tubs labeled with cheerful names. But one caught my eye, Mint Forest. Its lid wasn't properly sealed, and beneath the frost, I saw something pinkish, not green. I leaned in, pretending to check the temperature gauge. The smell hit me rotten milk mixed with iron, he noticed. His eyes flicked to me, calm but alert. Careful, he said softly. That one's experimental. My throat went dry. I nodded, stepping back, my pulse hammering. He reached over and closed the lid slowly, his fingers brushing. Mine cold and sticky, like melted syrup. That night, I couldn't sleep. The image of that tub wouldn't leave my mind. I decided to call the police anonymously. I told them about the ledger, the matching dates, the freezer. They thanked me and said they'd look into it. I waited for days, checking the paper for any follow-up. Nothing. No arrest, no statement. And then, one morning, Jarmo's van was gone from its usual spot. 2 weeks later, a small article appeared on page 6. Local vendor relocates business amid seasonal decline. No mention of police involvement, no word about the missing children. It felt like the whole town had chosen to forget. But I couldn't. I went back to his old parking spot and found something half buried near the curb, a single ice cream stick, carved with letters. At first, I thought it was random etching, but when I cleaned it, I realized it spelled help. I took that stick to my friend Sari, a linguistics student who had helped the police before. She examined the markings and told me they were etched with something sharp metal, maybe a knife. She looked at me seriously. Jonas, whoever wrote this was desperate and small. I decided to find where Jarmo had moved. Through a delivery supplier, I learned he had registered his van under a new district near Naantali. I borrowed my brother's car and drove there one gray afternoon, telling no one. The van was easy to spot, parked near an empty playground. The music from its bell chimed faintly, repeating the same melody every few seconds. I waited in the car, pretending to read a newspaper. Around 4, I saw him open the back door of the van, carrying something wrapped in a tarp toward a shed behind the swings. I couldn't see clearly, but whatever he dragged left a faint trail in the sand. My hands trembled as I reached for my camera. I took a few blurred photos. Then, without really thinking, I stepped out and followed the trail. He must have heard me. The jingling music stopped abruptly. I froze mid-step. The silence that followed felt unnatural, thick. Then his voice came, soft, almost cheerful. "You shouldn't be here, Jonas." I turned. He was standing by the shed, holding a scoop in one hand and a cleaver in the other. His apron was splattered, not red, but brownish, dried. His face had lost that market-friendly smile. "You were curious," he said, walking toward me slowly. "Writers always are. You think truth is sweet, but it melts fast." I tried to sound calm. "Where are they, Jarmo?" He tilted his head, like a teacher disappointed by a question. "They're flavors now," he said simply. They live forever in memory. You can't let sweetness go to waste. Something snapped in me. I ran. My shoes slipped on the sand, my lungs burning. Behind me, I heard the faint chime start again, his van's tune. But slower now, warped. I didn't look back until I reached the car. When I turned the key, the engine refused. My hands shook so hard I dropped them twice. By the time the car roared to life, he was standing under the swings, watching, one hand raised in a mock wave. I drove straight to the police station in Naantali, heart racing, words stumbling. I told them everything, his name, the ledger, the van, the shed. They dispatched 2 officers immediately. I waited in the lobby, staring at the clock. After what felt like an eternity, one of them returned. He looked tired. "We found the van," he said, "but it's empty. No man, no shed, just tire marks." They searched for days, issued a notice, even checked ports in case he tried to leave Finland. Nothing. It was as if he had evaporated. My editor forbade me from printing the story. "We have no proof," he said. "You'll ruin your career with conspiracy talk." He was right in a way. Without evidence, I was just another paranoid journalist chasing ghosts. Months passed. I stopped looking, or at least I tried to. The town moved on. Summer turned to fall, and Jarmo became a memory no one wanted to revisit. Until one morning, a small envelope arrived at my desk. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper torn from a ledger, written neatly in blue ink, flavor of the day, Junus Frost. Next to it, a filled circle. I dropped the page. My mouth went dry. The next hours were a blur, telling Mika, showing the police, locking my apartment door 3 times that night. But nothing happened. Days passed, weeks, no van, no sign. I almost convinced myself it was a prank. Then came winter, and with it, silence. In December, during a heavy snowfall, the city workers found something under the frozen riverbank near the old playground. A rusted freezer, sealed shut with chains. Inside were several small tubs, each labeled with familiar names: Blueberry Bell, Cherry Road, Mint Forest, and one new one, Junus Frost. The police identified fragments of human tissue preserved inside, but they couldn't trace them all. DNA testing was in its infancy then, and the evidence was fragile. The report made front-page news for a day, then faded. The official line was that Jarmo likely drowned in the river while hiding the evidence. They called it closure. But I never believed that. You don't vanish so completely without intention. And you don't send letters from the grave. Years later, in 1999, I received another envelope. Same handwriting. Inside was a Polaroid photo, an ice cream truck parked near a playground, but not in Finland. The note said only, "Business reopened. New recipes." The postmark read, "Reykjavik, Iceland." I don't know if he's still alive, or if someone else carries his name now. Sometimes I think about those kids, their names, their laughter that should have grown into something. I think about that whisper in my recording, "Don't," and how I ignored it. I should have stopped him sooner. Every summer, when the bells of an ice cream van echo through the street, I freeze. That melody, soft, innocent, rhythmic, always sounds the same. And sometimes, just sometimes, I swear I can hear a child's voice behind it. Crying, calling, melting away. I was only in Hallstatt for the weekend, visiting my cousin Elise's grave. She'd gone missing 2 years earlier, and when they finally found her body in a lake 20 kilometers away, it didn't even look like her. I still remember the way her hands looked at the funeral, thin, stiff, and almost waxy. I didn't think I'd ever come back to that part of Austria again, but something inside me needed closure. The kind you can't get from standing by a stone with someone's name on it. That morning, I stopped by the market square for coffee. Hallstatt's air always smelled faintly of pine and damp stone. While waiting for my drink, I noticed a tiny shop tucked between a bakery and a florist, a doll repair shop. Its display window caught my eye because one of the dolls had Elise's same auburn hair, curled exactly the way she used to style it. I almost laughed at myself for even thinking it, but my stomach tightened anyway. The sign above the door read, "Helena's Dolls and Restorations." I don't know why I went in, maybe because grief makes you curious about anything that even slightly resembles what you've lost. The smell inside was wrong. Not bad, just wrong, something between old fabric and damp plaster, with a sweetness beneath it, like dried flowers that had been dead too long. Shelves lined the walls, crowded with porcelain faces in varying states of completion. Some were cracked, others half-painted. There were doll limbs, wigs, eyes, little dresses folded neatly in boxes, labeled with names written in cursive. Clara, I sold. Clara again. I thought maybe they were styles or client names. A woman stepped out from behind a curtain at the back. She must have been in her late 50s, maybe early 60s, tall, composed, her hair in a tight bun streaked with silver. "Guten Tag," she said with a small, polite smile. "You're welcome to look. Do you collect?" I shook my head. "No, just curious. I used to have a doll that looked a bit like one in your window." Her eyes softened. "Ah, we all keep the faces we miss close, don't we?" Something about how she said that made me pause. She gestured toward the counter where a doll sat unfinished, its face blank, eyes waiting to be glued in. "Would you like to see how they come to life?" I hesitated, but nodded. She showed me the delicate brushes, the pigments, the process of painting the tiny lips and eyebrows. Her hands were steady, too steady. "Each face," she said, "is based on someone who once smiled." I smiled awkwardly, thinking she meant inspiration. But then she added quietly, "You'd be surprised how memory can be shaped like clay if you love it enough." That line stayed with me. I don't know why I didn't leave then. Maybe because she didn't seem dangerous, just strange, lonely. I looked around while she continued talking softly about her late husband, who'd been a sculptor. That's when I noticed one particular doll sitting apart from the others, in a glass dome. Its face wasn't like the rest, it was hyper-realistic, almost uncanny. The freckles, the faint dimple in one cheek, even the slightly uneven eyebrows, my heart started pounding before I could understand why. I leaned closer, and my breath caught in my throat. It was Elise. Not a resemblance, not a coincidence. Every detail, the slope of her nose, the small scar under her right eye from when she fell off her bike as a kid, it was her. I whispered, "Where did you get that?" The widow's voice floated behind me. "She's one of my favorites." I turned around slowly. This doll, who gave you her picture?" Helena tilted her head, studying me. "You know her then?" I felt dizzy. "She was my cousin. She died 2 years ago." Helena smiled faintly. "Ah, I didn't know her by name, but she had a beautiful face. You have the same eyes." I stepped back, pulse racing. "You made this? From what?" "From memory," she said simply. "From seeing her." My throat went dry. "When did you see her?" She looked at the ceiling, as though trying to recall. "A spring evening. She came here, like you. She said she wanted to see something beautiful." My voice broke. "You met her?" Helena's eyes met mine, calm and unblinking. "Everyone meets me before they leave." I wanted to scream at her, demand answers, but my voice was gone. My mind kept circling back to before they leave. Before they leave, what? I could feel my hands trembling, so I shoved them into my coat pockets to hide it. I have to go," I said finally, but she stepped aside to block the door, not forcefully, just enough to make me stop. "You shouldn't leave in such a state," she murmured. "Grief opens the wrong doors." I said I'd come back later, that I just needed air. She nodded slowly and let me pass, her hand brushing mine. Her fingers were cold and powdery, like ceramic dust. Outside, I practically ran. I went straight to the small police station near the harbor. The officer on duty was a young man who seemed skeptical from the start. "You're saying you saw a doll that looks like your deceased cousin?" he asked. "Yes, not looks like is her. It's her face, every detail. And that woman, she said she saw her before she died." He sighed. "Do you have proof she was involved?" "I know, but please, just come see it." He finally agreed, probably thinking it would calm me down. When we returned, the shop looked different. The window display was rearranged. The doll that looked like Elise was gone. Inside, the place felt warmer, cleaner, almost freshly painted. Helena smiled as if nothing had happened. "Ah, officer," she greeted pleasantly. "Something I can help with?" The officer glanced around. "A report was made about a missing person's likeness in one of your dolls." Helena frowned delicately. "Oh dear, I assure you, my dolls are based on generic molds. I make repairs, not portraits." I started to protest, but she opened a drawer and took out a mold, a plain, featureless head of clay. "See? Standard base. The rest is paint and patience." The officer nodded. "Seems ordinary enough." He gave me a look that said this isn't worth pursuing. I felt heat rise to my face. "She had it here an hour ago." I insisted. Helena sighed. "Grief plays tricks, my dear. Perhaps what you saw reminded you of her." Faces echo through time. The officer apologized for the inconvenience, thanked her, and left. I followed him out, furious and humiliated. "You didn't see it," I shouted. "You think I'm crazy?" He hesitated. "No, but people see what they need to see, especially when they're mourning. Maybe you should rest." I barely slept that night. My dreams were full of painted faces watching me. Around dawn, I decided to go back just to take a photo, something I could show. When I got there, the door was locked, curtains drawn. I waited nearly an hour before she appeared, carrying a small wooden box. She seemed startled to see me. "You shouldn't linger," she said quietly. "What's in the box?" I asked. "An order for delivery." "To where?" She smiled faintly. "The lake." Something inside me broke. I lunged forward and grabbed the box from her hands. It wasn't heavy, but when I opened it, I froze. Inside was a porcelain face, half-painted, no hair yet, no eyes, but the features were mine. The curve of my lips, the shape of my jaw, even the small mole above my eyebrow. I dropped it, the face shattering against the stones. Helena gasped softly, then whispered, "You've ruined her." I backed away, heart pounding so hard it hurt. "What are you doing to people?" Her expression didn't change. "Preserving them." "For what?" "For love," she said simply. "They stay young forever. Perfect. They don't rot. They don't fade. They're remembered exactly as they were." I shook my head. "You kill them." "No," she said, stepping closer. "They give themselves. They come broken, asking to be remade." I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I reached my cousin's old house by the water, where I collapsed on the steps, shaking. I called the police again, but by the time they arrived, the shop was empty. Completely empty. Shelves bare, walls stripped, dustless floors, as if no one had been there in years. They searched the records. There was no business license under her name, no property ownership, no tax number. The address wasn't even registered as commercial. It belonged to an abandoned tailor's shop. Still, I couldn't let it go. I asked around. An old man at the tavern said he remembered a Helena, decades ago, married to a sculptor who drowned in the lake in 1965. "She never left," he said. "But her shop's been closed since I was a boy." I thought he was confused, maybe senile, until he showed me a faded newspaper clipping. Local doll maker's husband found dead, widow withdraws from public life. The photograph showed her same face, same bun, same eyes. But the date said 1965. I left Hallstatt that evening, unable to breathe, until the mountains disappeared behind me. But that night, when I unpacked my bag, something clattered to the floor. It was a porcelain hand, small, pale, fingers curved gently inward. I didn't own anything like it. I didn't even know how it got there. For weeks afterward, I tried to convince myself it was all stress, grief, coincidence. Then, one morning, I woke to find the hand placed neatly on my nightstand, palms open, as if waiting to hold something. I took it to the police in Vienna. They tested it. The report came back 2 weeks later. The material wasn't porcelain. It was a composite of bone powder, resin, and plaster. And beneath the surface, they found traces of human DNA. They couldn't match it to anyone. Months passed. I stopped talking about it, mostly because people started avoiding me whenever I brought it up. But I couldn't throw the hand away. I kept it in a sealed box, locked in my closet. Every few nights, I'd hear a faint tapping from inside, slow, patient, like fingernails brushing wood. Last summer, I returned to Hallstatt again. I told myself it was to say goodbye properly to Elise, to put it behind me. But part of me wanted to see if the shop was still gone. When I reached the square, it was exactly as I remembered: the bakery, the florist, the little gap where the doll shop used to be. Only now, a new sign hung over the door: Lena's Porcelain Restorations. The woman inside looked younger, maybe in her 30s, but her eyes, those calm, unblinking gray eyes, were the same. She smiled when she saw me. "Welcome back," she said softly. "You've aged beautifully. Shall I finish what she started?" I didn't answer. I turned and walked out, without looking back, but I swear, as I passed the window, I saw my cousin's doll again, only now there was another one beside it. Same hair, same eyes, my eyes. And I knew, no matter how far I ran, some part of me was already drying on her shelf. I still remember the first night I worked the desk at the Lakeside Motel. It was supposed to be a quiet, temporary job, night shifts, a few guests, mostly truckers and tourists passing through Rotorua. The owner, Mr. Hart, was this polite but stiff man in his 50s who spoke like he was still reading from a manual. "Keep the keys logged, the register neat, and no guests after midnight check-in," he'd said. Easy money, I thought, until I realized how wrong I was. It began about 2 weeks in, when I noticed something odd about room 27. The key was always missing from the board. Every morning when I started my shift, I'd check the register, and every time, room 27 was listed as occupied under a name I didn't recognize. "A long-term guest," Hart said the first time I asked. "He prefers privacy. Doesn't like housekeeping." I didn't think much of it then. Some travelers did that, maybe an artist or a writer who needed quiet. But something about the way Hart's face stayed completely still when he said it made me uneasy. I started noticing patterns. The power flickered near the back hallway some nights, right around midnight. There was a faint humming from somewhere behind the laundry room, like machinery running underground. Hart had a rule: never go near the maintenance store after hours. "Pipes and fuse boxes," he said. "Leave it be." But once you start working nights alone, curiosity becomes your worst company. And in that silence, when you've counted the minutes till dawn, even the hum of pipes can sound like breathing. One Thursday, around 1:30 a.m., the motel phone rang. It startled me. Calls that late were rare. I picked up, and a man's voice said, "I need to speak to whoever's in room 27. His tone was nervous, rushed. I explained that I couldn't transfer calls to that room. There was a pause, Then he said, "That's not possible. My brother's been dead for 3 months." My hand went cold around the receiver. "I think you have the wrong number," I said, and hung up before I could hear another word. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I checked the register, room 27, still occupied, still paid up. The guest's name was Robert Pike. I ran my finger down the payment column. The same credit card number appeared every month, charged automatically. Hart must have arranged it. When I asked him about it later that day, he didn't even look surprised. "It's handled," he said, brushing me off. "Some guests prefer their business private." I decided to dig a little on my own. During the next shift, I brought my old laptop and searched the name Robert Pike Rotorua. The first result was an obituary. A hiker found dead near Lake Tarawera 3 months ago. Same name. Same middle initial. It couldn't be coincidence. My chest felt tight, like I'd swallowed ice. I looked over at the key rack, room 27's key still gone. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the maintenance key ring hanging under the desk. Around 3 a.m., I slipped into the hallway and followed the hum. The sound grew louder near the laundry door, then turned into a rhythmic thumping, dull, distant, mechanical. The maintenance door had a rusted padlock, but I noticed Hart always left the key labeled storage on the hook by the boiler. It fit perfectly. The hinges squeaked when I pushed the door open, revealing a steep metal staircase descending into darkness. The air smelled like bleach and damp earth. My flashlight beam shook as I stepped down. The basement was smaller than I expected, maybe 2 rooms divided by a heavy sliding door. On one side, shelves of old linens and cleaning supplies. On the other, a row of locked storage cages. Inside one cage, I saw something that made my skin crawl, a set of neatly folded clothes, a pair of shoes, and a wallet on a table. The wallet had a faded photo of a man and a young boy. The name on the bot ID read Robert Pike. I backed away, pulse hammering, then noticed something else, an intercom speaker above the sliding door. I pressed my ear to it. Faint breathing came through, uneven and slow, followed by a muffled voice, "Please, help." My entire body froze. It was a man's voice, weak, hoarse. I jerked back and stared at the speaker, disbelief clawing through my chest. Then I realized the sound was coming from beyond the door. The handle resisted when I tried it. It was bolted shut from my side. I pressed my hand against the door, cool metal, faint vibrations. Someone was definitely behind it. "Who's in there?" I whispered. There was shuffling, then the voice again, clearer this time. "He locks us in at night." My knees nearly gave out. "Who? Mr. Hart?" I asked. But before the voice could answer, I heard footsteps upstairs. I ran up the stairs and barely made it behind the counter before Hart appeared in the lobby doorway. He looked calm, too calm. "What were you doing downstairs?" he asked softly. I tried to sound casual. "Just checking the breaker." Lights flickered again. His eyes lingered on my face, reading it like a confession. "Breaker's fine," he said, stepping closer. "Stay out of there. Dangerous equipment." I nodded, but I could feel sweat dripping down my spine. He smiled thinly, then went back toward his office. The humming stopped a few minutes later. I should have quit that night, but I didn't. I convinced myself I was imagining things, exhaustion, paranoia, coincidence. Until the next evening, when a man in a suit walked in asking for Mr. Hart. He introduced himself as Andrew Pike from the bank. He said he needed to discuss unauthorized charges on his late brother's card. My throat dried up. "Robert Pike?" I asked. He nodded, frowning. "Yeah, the charges are still coming from here, this motel." Hart appeared moments later, shaking the man's hand. "Of course, Mr. Pike. Why? Don't we step into my office?" His tone was smooth, practiced. The door closed behind them. I couldn't hear much. just muffled voices. But 15 minutes later, Andrew left looking pale and unsettled. He didn't even make eye contact with me on the way out. That night, Hart left early, saying he had maintenance duties elsewhere. The second he drove off, I went back downstairs with my phone flashlight. The humming had returned, louder this time. The metal door's bolts were still shut, but the air felt warmer, stale. I called out, "Hello, can you hear me?" Silence. Then, faintly, "He moves them." I felt an ache in my stomach, dread coiling up like smoke. I pulled a screwdriver from the supply shelf and began unscrewing the bolts. My hands shook so badly I dropped one screw on the floor. After the last bolt came free, I slid the door open. The smell hit first sour, chemical, something like decay. I gagged and lifted the flashlight. There were 3 small, concrete rooms connected by narrow hallways, each with a steel door. Inside the first room, a mattress lay on the floor. The walls were covered in scratches, names, dates, tally marks. In the second, I found ropes, a tray of food containers, and a single shoe. The third door was padlocked, but a faint noise came from inside like breathing. "Hold on," I whispered, trying the lock with trembling fingers. The door suddenly jerked from the inside, and I stumbled back. A voice cried out, hoarse and raw, "Please, don't leave us." My flashlight beam flicked over the window, slid an eye staring back, terrified and bloodshot. "He's gone," I said quickly. "I'm going to get help." As I ran back upstairs, the lights in the hallway flickered again. I called the police from the front desk, speaking fast, barely coherent. They told me to stay inside, that officers were en route. I waited near the door, heart slamming so hard I could hear it. 10 minutes passed. Then, headlights appeared outside, but it wasn't a police car. Hart's truck pulled up. He walked in calmly, holding a metal toolbox. "You went down there again, didn't you?" His voice was eerily calm, like a teacher catching a child lying. I stood frozen behind the counter. "They're alive, Hart," I said, my voice breaking. "You can't." He dropped the toolbox on the floor with a metallic thud. "You shouldn't have interfered," he said, stepping closer. "They were supposed to stay quiet." He reached into his pocket, and for a second I thought he was going to pull out a weapon. But it was a key. He lifted it slowly, smiling. "Do you want to see what happens when you ruin order?" I backed toward the door, fumbling for the latch. Then, suddenly, blue lights flashed outside. 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop. Hart turned his head sharply, eyes narrowing. "You called them," he said flatly. The officers burst in, guns drawn, shouting commands. Hart didn't resist. He simply dropped the key and raised his hands. "You don't understand," he said. "They wanted to stay." They cuffed him and led him out while I stood shaking near the counter, barely able to breathe. Downstairs, they found 4 people, 2 men, 1 woman, and 1 child, all emaciated but alive. They'd been missing for months. Hart had kept them there under the guise of protective lodging, feeding them just enough to survive. He'd taken their belongings, forged transactions, and written fake letters to their families. Robert Pike's card was one of many. When the police searched his office, they found a ledger titled Residence of Permanence. Each name had dates, payment records, and notes like quiet sleeper or required sedation. That ledger haunted me for years. The authorities later called him the caretaker, one of New Zealand's most disturbing serial offenders. He never explained why he did it. During the trial, he sat, calmly, smiling. Whenever witnesses described the basement, I testified once. Standing there, I could still hear that humming sound in my head, the air vents, masking human breathing. After the conviction, I quit the motel industry for good. The lakeside was shut down, boarded up, Every time I drive past Rotorua now, I feel that same chill in my chest, like someone watching from behind a metal door. Months later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a photograph, the old key to room 27, lying on a white sheet, next to a note in neat handwriting. "You checked out too soon." I stared at it for hours before burning it in my backyard. Still, some nights, when the world is quiet enough, I swear I can hear that faint mechanical hum again, steady, patient, somewhere beneath the floor. I was halfway through slicing apples for my daughter's lunch when the notification popped up, "Babysitter match found." I remember smiling with relief because I'd spent nearly 2 weeks looking for someone reliable. My husband, Daniel, had just started his night shifts at the clinic in Lucerne, and my work as a translator often stretched into late hours. The app had glowing reviews, verified IDs, video introductions. It all seemed safe. The profile showed a woman named Clara Vogel, mid-20s, short dark hair, a soft smile, local address verified. The chat was polite, even warm. She said she loved children, especially quiet ones. I didn't think much of it then. When she arrived that Friday, she looked exactly like her picture, maybe even gentler in person. Gray sweater, tidy hair, clear eyes that made you feel she was really paying attention. My daughter, Elise, who was 7, instantly liked her. That was rare. Elise was usually shy, needing days to warm up to strangers, but she clung to Clara's hand like they'd known each other for years. Clara spoke softly, but with this calm authority that made you trust her. She asked about Elise's bedtime, her allergies, what stories she liked, everything you'd expect from a professional. I remember feeling relieved as I grabbed my coat for a dinner meeting downtown. Before I left, I glanced back. Clara was sitting cross-legged on the rug, showing Elise how to fold paper cranes. They both looked up and waved, smiling. I didn't know that would be the last image I'd ever see of them together. The meeting ran longer than planned. When I checked my phone, I had a text from Clara. "All good, she's asleep. Take your time." The timestamp read 9:32 p.m. I replied, "Thanks so much, be home soon." No response, but I didn't find it strange. At 10:15, I left the restaurant, took a taxi home, and noticed something odd when I reached the apartment building. The hallway lights were on, but my door was slightly ajar. Not open enough to alarm me yet, just unlatched. I remember calling softly, "Clara?" No answer. I stepped in, and the apartment was quiet, too quiet. Elise's nightlight glowed faintly down the hall. Her bed was empty, the blankets pushed to the side. Her favorite stuffed rabbit lay on the floor. I checked the bathroom, the closets, even under the table, that stupid, frantic parent instinct that makes you look in places where no child could possibly hide. "Clara?" I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. Her bag was gone. The dishes from dinner were washed and stacked neatly. There was a faint smell of lavender, like she'd sprayed something before leaving. I tried calling her number through the app, but it said, "User not reachable." I tried again, same message. Then I opened the app itself. Her profile picture was gone, just a blank, gray silhouette. I scrolled up our chat. The messages were still there, but her name had changed to deleted user. That's when my hands started shaking. I ran downstairs, banging on my neighbor's door, stammering that my daughter was gone. He called the police immediately. The next few hours were a blur. Officers searched every corner of the building, then the streets outside. They took my statement, asked me to describe Clara, her clothes, her voice. I showed them the messages, but the app refreshed midway, and suddenly our entire conversation disappeared. Every line. Like it had never happened. They asked for screenshots. I had none. I didn't think I'd ever need proof of a babysitter's existence. Around 2 a.m., two detectives came back to say they'd reviewed the building's security footage. I stood beside them in the lobby as they played it back. There I was, leaving at 7:24 p.m. Then, at 7:30, Clara arrived. She smiled at the camera, waved politely to someone off-screen, and entered. The footage fast-forwarded. At 9, the lights dimmed as usual for the building's night mode. They watched until midnight. Clara never came out, not once, but no one else went in, either. "Are you sure she didn't leave with your daughter before midnight?" one of them asked. "I'm sure," I whispered. "The door was open, but she wasn't here. Neither was my child." They exchanged looks. One muttered something about possible technical glitches, but the timestamp never skipped a frame. They asked if I could have imagined hiring her stress, exhaustion, maybe even an online scam. But there was no scam. There was a real woman in my living room, folding paper cranes with my daughter, a real voice, a real smell of lavender. I knew what I'd seen. By morning, they issued an Amber Alert. Elise's photo was on every screen, every poster, every police bulletin in Lucerne. For 2 days, I barely slept. They traced every bus, train, and taxi leaving town. Nothing, no witnesses, no trace of a woman named Clara Vogel anywhere in Switzerland. Not on any registry, ID, database, or even hospital record. It was like the name itself had never belonged to anyone. On the 3rd day, Daniel came home early from his shift. His face was pale. He said one of the nurses at his clinic thought she recognized the description, a woman who used to volunteer at their children's wing years ago. But when he showed her Clara's photo, the nurse went silent, then quietly said, "That can't be her. She died in 2017. I remember that moment like a photograph burned into my mind. The way Daniel's hand trembled as he showed me the obituary. Local childcare worker found dead after fire at home, suspected gas leak. The photo was grainy, but the face, it was her. The same calm eyes, same slight smile. I refused to believe it. I told the police, but they dismissed it as mistaken resemblance. They said people often look alike. They said I was under stress. That night, I sat alone in Elise's room, staring at the tiny paper cranes still on the floor. I picked one up. It had a faint red mark inside the crease. I unfolded it, thinking it was a drop of paint. It wasn't. It was a smear of blood. My stomach turned. I checked another, same thing. Tiny, almost invisible smudges inside the folds. My heart pounded so hard it felt like my ribs would crack. The police collected the cranes for testing. 2 days later, a detective came to the door with an expression I'll never forget, part pity, part disbelief. "The blood," he said slowly, "it matches your daughter's DNA. But there's something else. We found prints on the paper that don't belong to anyone in your family. And the database flagged them as belonging to a deceased individual." He wouldn't look me in the eyes when he said it. Weeks passed. I stopped working. I stopped leaving the apartment. Every sound from the hallway made my pulse jump. I replayed that footage over and over. Clara, walking in, never out. Once, I noticed something I hadn't before. At 9:33, 1 minute after her last text, the camera flickered. Just for a second, the light distorted. And in that 1 second, her head turned sharply toward the lens, eyes staring right into it, like she knew I'd be watching later. I nearly dropped my laptop. I called the police again, begged them to review it. They said they already had. "Ma'am," one officer said gently, "there's nothing unusual there. The file you're describing, it doesn't exist in our copy." I told him to come see my version. But when I opened the file again, that frame was gone. The whole section between 9:30 and 9:34 was missing. Months went by. People tried to comfort me, but they couldn't. Not really. Daniel and I grew distant. Every night, I'd hear faint sounds, a soft creak of floorboards, a whisper of movement near Elise's room. Once, I swore I heard her laugh. I ran in, heart racing, but the room was empty. Just the faint smell of lavender again. I began leaving my phone recording overnight, hoping to capture something. Most nights it picked up nothing. But once, around 2:14 a.m., it recorded a single, quiet voice. She's still sleeping. It wasn't Elise's voice. After that, I stopped recording. I stopped trying to understand. The police eventually closed the case under child abduction, unresolved. But they kept calling her the suspect. They never once referred to her as a real person. Just a file number. I hated that. I needed her to be real, because if she wasn't, then what had I let into my home? Last winter, nearly a year after Elise vanished, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photograph, Elise, sitting on a swing in a park I didn't recognize. She was smiling. Her hair was longer, but it was her. Behind her stood Clara, holding the swing ropes, looking straight at the camera. On the back of the photo was a date, 15 October 2021. The postmark on the envelope was from Germany. The police analyzed the image, but couldn't verify where it was taken. They said it could be digitally altered, but I knew it wasn't. There were details too small to fake the tiny freckle on Elise's wrist, the chipped bead on her bracelet. I asked if they could trace the fingerprints on the photo. They said there were none. Wiped clean, they told me, like it was handled with gloves. Daniel couldn't take it anymore. He left for Zurich a few months later, said he couldn't live surrounded by ghosts. Maybe he was right. I started noticing small things: missing spoons, hair ties, bits of paper. Once, a paper crane appeared on my kitchen counter, perfectly folded. I hadn't made it. I couldn't even remember owning paper like that anymore. One night in early spring, I woke to a sound that nearly stopped my heart, a soft, rhythmic creaking from the hallway. The same pattern as Elise's old swing. Set. I sat up, barely breathing. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, "Mama." I stumbled out of bed, tears already burning my eyes. "Elise?" I whispered. No answer. I followed the sound to her room. The door was half open. Inside, the nightlight flickered. There, sitting on the floor, was a new paper crane larger than the others, folded from a page torn out of my own notebook. On it, in tiny handwriting, were two words, "Still here." That was the first time I felt something other than fear, something closer to dread mixed with longing. I touched the paper, and it was warm, as if someone had just held it. I wanted to believe it meant Elise was alive, somewhere. But deep down, I knew that message wasn't from her. A few months later, the app I'd used to hire Clara suddenly reappeared in the App Store after being removed for over a year. Same logo, same interface. I downloaded it on a whim. My hands shook as I opened it. The homepage looked identical, verified. Profiles, safety badges, glowing reviews. Out of curiosity, I searched the name Clara. Hundreds of results came up, but one caught my eye: Clara V. Same photo, same gray sweater, same gentle smile. I clicked it. The page loaded slowly, then showed, "Currently unavailable, last active, 2 minutes ago." That was the moment I finally accepted the truth. I'd been running from whatever she was. She wasn't gone. Not a ghost, not a scammer. Something that could move between lives, between systems, wearing trust like a mask. I deleted the app immediately, but sometimes at night, I still get notifications on my phone from an unknown sender. The messages are always the same, just one line each time. "All good. She's asleep. Take your time." I was half awake when I realized I couldn't move my legs. At first, I thought it was the anesthesia, wearing off the heavy kind that leaves you foggy but safe. But the moment I tried to open my mouth to call the nurse, I knew something was wrong. My tongue felt swollen, the air tasted metallic, and somewhere close by, a machine hummed with a rhythm that didn't belong in the recovery room. I could hear my own heartbeat through the monitor, slow but heavy, and when I tried to lift my hand, the weight of the IV tugged back harder than it should have. That's when it hit me. This wasn't the same room I'd been prepped in. The walls weren't sterile white, they were gray, concrete, and unpainted. I remember the surgery was supposed to be simple. I'd come to Kyoto from Osaka for a rhinoplasty, a minor procedure to fix a small bump that had always made me self-conscious. The surgeon, Dr. Watanabe, had been featured in magazines, his clinic spotless and professional, filled with smiling nurses and quiet music. Everything about it felt safe. I'd met him twice before the operation, and both times he'd assured me that perfection was in the details. He said it like a mantra, calm and confident. I didn't realize then that those words were meant for him, not for me. The night before the surgery, I couldn't sleep. I kept checking the clinic's website, scrolling through before and after photos, trying to imagine my own transformation. It wasn't vanity, it was about control. I'd just turned 30 and had spent my 20s surviving things that felt uncontrollable anxiety, failed relationships, job rejections. I wanted to fix something, anything. And my nose felt like a manageable start. When I finally arrived that morning, everything looked exactly as promised. Bright lights, pastel walls, a nurse offering tea before the prep. Dr. Watanabe greeted me with a gentle nod, his mask dangling from one ear. "You'll wake up. New," he'd said. Now, lying there in the half-dark with restraints cutting into my wrists, I felt new. Yes, but not in the way I'd imagined. The air was colder. There was no hum of people, no distant chatter, just the machine, the monitor, and faint footsteps. When I tried again to move my right leg, I felt a sting of pain, not surgical pain, but fresh, raw, deep. My chest tightened. I wasn't in recovery. I was still on an operating table. I forced my eyes open wider, blinking past the fog. A thin strip of fluorescent light above flickered every few seconds. I could see the edge of a surgical tray near my feet, instruments glinting wet. And there, on the far side of the room, someone stood watching me. He wasn't wearing a mask, just a surgical cap and gloves. His expression was soft, deliberate, almost proud. It was Dr. Watanabe. He noticed my eyes open and smiled faintly, as though he'd been waiting for me to wake up. "You shouldn't be awake yet," he said quietly, stepping closer. His tone wasn't panicked. It was instructional, as if I were a student making a mistake. I tried to speak, but all that came out was a guttural sound through the tube taped to my mouth. He tilted his head, studying me. "I needed to make a correction," he continued. "The structure wasn't symmetrical. You'd thank me later if you understood what imperfection does to the mind." My chest burned. I tried again to move, to tear the IV out, to scream. Nothing. My limbs were useless. He must have given me a paralytic instead of anesthesia, something that let me feel without allowing me to react. I could feel every heartbeat pulsing through the incision on my face. He reached for something on the tray, humming under his breath, a soft classical tune, Chopin maybe. He adjusted the surgical lamp above me, the heat of it suddenly glaring against my skin. Then, without hesitation, he lifted a scalpel. I wanted to believe I'd fainted, that I hallucinated what came next, but I didn't. I felt the pull of his fingers at my nose, the scrape of the blade, the sound wet and deliberate of him, slicing through what he deemed wrong. He talked as he worked, calm as a craftsman. "Your first surgery was excellent," he murmured, "but I missed something. The bridge angles forward too much. That ruins proportion." My mind screamed, but my mouth stayed still. Tears pooled at the corners of my eyes and ran into my hairline. He noticed. "Ah," he whispered, almost admiringly. "You're still with me. That's good. You'll appreciate the precision." The pain came in waves, sharp, then dull, then searing again. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. His eyes never blinked. They were glassy, fascinated. He wasn't doing this for money or fame. He was doing it for satisfaction, for control. I remembered the newspaper clippings in his office, the flawless faces of celebrities he'd operated on. I wondered if they ever woke up, like this too, unable to scream. Time lost meaning. At some point, he switched instruments. I heard metal clink, felt something cold press against my cheek, and then a sting like ice spreading under the skin. He leaned close enough for me to smell the antiseptic on his gloves. "You'll be perfect now," he whispered. "No one will know, not even you." When the door clicked behind him, I realized he wasn't done just preparing something. The silence that followed was worse than his presence. Every second stretched, thick and unbearable. The monitor beeped steadily, reminding me I was still alive, still trapped in a body that refused to obey. Then I heard movement near the corner, soft rustling, a faint metallic rattle. I shifted my eyes enough to see another figure, smaller, moving carefully through the shadows. It was a woman in scrubs, one of the nurses, I guessed, but she looked pale, terrified. She noticed my eyes open and mouthed something I couldn't hear. Her hands shook as she reached for the IV pole, adjusting something discreetly. Then she whispered so softly I barely caught it, "Don't move. He'll hear you." I wanted to tell her I couldn't move even if I tried. She looked toward the door, then back at me. "I'm sorry," she said, voice cracking. "You're not the first." Those words hit harder than the pain. She glanced at a clock on the wall. It read 3:42 a.m., and then turned off the monitor, silencing the steady beeping. My pulse raced in my ears, loud enough to fill the void. She leaned close again. "He keeps them in the other room," she whispered. "The ones who didn't wake up right." My stomach twisted. The air smelled faintly of something chemical, something decaying. I wanted to ask her how long this had been happening, but before I could form the thought, the door handle turned. She froze. Dr. Watanabe stepped back in, carrying a syringe. His eyes darted to the monitor, then to her. "Why is this off?" he asked sharply. She stammered something about recalibration, about voltage fluctuation. He stared at her for a long, tense moment, then smiled in that same eerie, measured way. "Always careful," he said. "Good." He turned his gaze back to me, the syringe glinting between his fingers. "We're almost done," he said gently. "You'll rest now." The nurse took a step back. I could feel panic rising again, my breath fast and shallow through the tube. He injected something into the IV clear, viscous. "This will make the transition smoother," he said. I felt it almost immediately, a cold flood rushing up my arm, through my neck, dulling everything. My eyelids grew heavy, but I fought to keep them open. I didn't want to slip under again. Not into his world, not into silence. The nurse's eyes met mine one last time before darkness swallowed me. She mouthed two words, "Stay awake." When I opened my eyes again, I was in a hospital, not his clinic. The walls were white, the kind of white that means safety, real safety. My arms were bandaged, IVs replaced, and there was a police officer near the door. A doctor, not Watanabe, introduced himself, explaining I'd been found unconscious in a storage room beneath the clinic. Someone had called emergency services anonymously. I wanted to ask who, but deep down, I knew. It took weeks before I could speak properly again. The reconstruction on my face was delicate, but left faint scars along the bridge of my nose and under one eye. When detectives questioned me, I told them everything: the second surgery, the restraint, the nurse, his words. They listened, recording every detail, but their faces stayed unreadable. When I asked if they'd found him, the lead investigator sighed. "The clinic was cleared out," he said. "Surgical records burned, operating room dismantled. They'd found 3 hidden compartments behind a false wall, each one lined with metal drawers, each drawer labeled with patient initials. Most were empty, some weren't. The nurse was missing too. The investigator said there were traces of blood, multiple DNA samples, and a set of keys belonging to Watanabe. But no sign of him. For months, I couldn't look in a mirror. Every time I caught my reflection, I saw not just the scars, but his precision. The symmetry he'd chased now lived on my face, perfect and horrifying. I tried to go back to work, to eat, to walk outside without flinching, but the sound of surgical gloves snapping still made my skin crawl. Nights were worse. I'd wake from dreams of fluorescent light flickering over me, the sound of metal instruments clinking, his voice murmuring about proportion. One evening, about 6 months later, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, black and white, printed on glossy paper. It was me, post-surgery, lying on that table, my face half covered in gauze. Scrawled at the bottom in neat handwriting, "Perfection achieved." The police traced the postmark to Nagano, but found nothing beyond that. I moved apartments, changed my number, deleted my social media. Still, every few weeks, a new envelope would arrive, no return address, just my name, written carefully. Each one contained a photograph, close-ups of my face, taken from a distance, in public places. On the train, outside a grocery store, once, inside a cafe I hadn't even noticed had cameras. The angle was always the same, slightly tilted, focused on my nose. The police stopped responding after the 3rd report. "No fingerprints, no pattern, no evidence of threat," they'd said. But I knew. He was still out there, watching his creation in the wild. Sometimes, when I walk through crowds, I swear I feel someone matching my pace just a few steps behind. I don't turn around anymore. There's no point. If it's him, he wants me to look. Last month, I finally visited a different surgeon in Tokyo, hoping for a consultation to undo what he'd done. The receptionist smiled politely and handed me a clipboard. As I filled out my form, my pen froze at the signature line beneath the doctor's name. It read, "Assistant Surgeon H. Watanabe." I left before they called my name. People ask why I never went to the press, why I don't sue, why I still live in Japan. The truth is, I've thought about all of that, but part of me believes exposure is what he wants to be recognized, to see his art appreciated. I won't give him that satisfaction. Instead, I stay quiet, careful, unseen. Sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I catch my reflection in the darkened window. The symmetry of my features still unnerves me. And somewhere beneath that perfection, beneath the skin and scars, I can still hear his voice, gentle and certain. "You'll thank me later." It started the moment I opened the back door to feed the hens that morning, and heard what I thought was crying coming from the grain silo. I froze mid-step, the feed bucket tilting in my hand. It wasn't the wind, it was a human sound, high, thin, and desperate. I remember standing there, listening, the metal siding of the silo humming softly in the breeze, and then another sound followed, a muffled voice, maybe 2, echoing faintly from inside. My first thought was that someone had broken in during the night. My second thought, I'm ashamed to admit, was that maybe I was finally losing it. You see, I'd been working alone on that farm for months after my father passed. Sleep was scarce. Grief had turned the quiet into something almost alive. But the sound I heard that morning wasn't in my head. I walked closer, cautiously, calling out a hesitant, "Hello?" expecting maybe to hear laughter, kids playing a prank, something that would make sense. Nothing. Just a faint sobbing, like someone whispering through the walls. I circled the silo, my boots crunching on the frost-hardened soil, looking for any sign of entry. The door was locked from the outside with a rusted padlock, same as always. I rattled it, called out again. The sound stopped abruptly. It was like whoever was inside realized I could hear them. That silence chilled me worse than the wind. I ran back to the house, grabbed the keys, and came back shaking so badly I almost dropped them, trying to fit one into the lock. When I yanked the door open, the interior was pitch black. Dust swirled up, and the smell hit me, damp grain and rot. I stepped inside, blinking as my eyes adjusted, and saw the grain pile rising nearly halfway up the curved walls. Nothing seemed out of place. But then, faintly again, came a muffled cry from deeper within, somewhere behind the wall. My heart nearly punched through my ribs. I stumbled backward out into the daylight and slammed the door shut. My hands were shaking uncontrollably by then. I ran straight to the truck, drove into the village, and reported what I heard to the local police. When I told the officer, a man named Lindstrom, that there were voices inside my silo, he looked at me like I'd been drinking. I wasn't. I tried to explain the exact sound, the way it came from behind the grain, not within it. He said he'd send someone out, mostly to humor me. By the time 2 patrolmen arrived an hour later, the sound had stopped completely. We all stood there, listening, waiting, nothing. They climbed inside, shined flashlights, kicked at the metal walls. One of them even laughed, saying, "The acoustics in these old silos can mess with your head." I remember feeling embarrassed, like I'd wasted their time. They left after 10 minutes, telling me to get some rest. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the farmhouse set my nerves on edge. Around midnight, I looked out through the kitchen window toward the silo. A faint light flickered near its base, just for a second, like a reflection. I knew there was no electricity out there. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my coat, flashlight, and rifle, then stepped into the cold. My boots sank in the mud as I approached, my breath coming fast. The light was gone, but the door was slightly ajar, even though I'd locked it earlier. I could feel the blood drain from my face. I lifted the rifle, pushed the door open slowly, and aimed the flashlight inside. Nothing moved, but on the floor I saw fresh footprints, small ones, bare, and leading toward the back wall. That wall wasn't supposed to have any openings. It was solid metal. I followed the prints, each step stirring the smell of grain and damp wood. Then I saw it, a thin line, almost invisible unless the light hit it just right, a seam. I knelt and brushed the surface with my hand. It wasn't metal, it was plywood, painted over. I pressed against it and felt it give slightly, like there was a hollow space behind. I froze. For a long moment, I just crouched there, trying to decide whether to call the police again or pry it open myself. In the end, I didn't get the chance. Something or someone banged from the other side, 3 rapid hits. I screamed, dropped the flashlight, and bolted out into the night. I called the police again. This time, I refused to hang up until they sent a team. When they arrived the next morning, they came in full force, local cops, detectives, even a forensic van. I stood there as they tore down the false wall piece by piece. Behind it was a narrow hidden compartment, no larger than a closet, and inside, huddled in the corner, was a woman. Her hair was matted, her face pale and bruised. She was alive barely, and when they carried her out, she clutched at my arm, whispering something I couldn't understand. I'll never forget that look in her eyes. Not just terror, but relief so raw. It made my chest ache. The officers found another compartment farther up the silo ladder, this one sealed tighter. Inside were 2 bodies, both men, both in an advanced state of decay. I turned away and vomited into the dirt. The smell, the reality of it, it was too much. They taped off the entire area, questioning me for hours about who had access, what I'd seen, what I'd heard. I told them everything. The crying, the footprints, the banging. They asked about my farmhand, Rolf. I froze when they said his name. Rolf had worked for us for years, quiet, loyal, always polite. He'd stopped showing up a few weeks earlier, saying he was visiting family up north. They found him 2 days later, hiding in a derelict barn about 15 kilometers away. When they brought him in, I was there. His face was calm, almost peaceful, as though none of this surprised him. I remember him looking at me and saying, "You weren't supposed to open it yet." Those words haunt me more than anything else. The police said he'd been using those hidden compartments for years, even before my father died. Smuggling people, maybe. But it was more than that, something twisted. The victims weren't random. They were drifters, migrants, people no one would report missing. During the investigation, they discovered several more hidden spaces across the property. False walls, underground storage rooms, one even beneath the old barn. It was like he'd been building a network of secret prisons right under my nose. And the worst part? I'd helped him install some of them, thinking they were just extra feed storage. He'd convinced me the farm needed upgrades, saying the grain business was expanding. I still can't process how easily I believed him. The woman who survived, her name was Marta, told investigators she'd been held for almost 3 weeks. She said Rolf would visit her every night, bringing food, talking softly through the wall as if they were old friends. He'd ask her to sing for him, and when she refused, he'd play the recordings of the others, their screams, their pleas. He told her the silo kept them safe. Those were his exact words. I still can't think about it without feeling sick. When they took him to court, I went once, only once. Seeing him there, sitting so still, made my skin crawl. He smiled when he saw me, like we shared some private joke. During the testimony, they said the compartments had soundproof insulation, but only partial enough to keep the noise faint. The voices I heard had slipped through tiny cracks. That's why they sounded so distant. If I hadn't gone out to check that morning, if I'd ignored it like any other strange noise on the farm, Marta would have died too. The thought of that keeps me awake some nights. After the trial, the police released my property back to me, but I couldn't stay there. I sold it within months. Every sound, the creak of wood, the rattle of metal made my stomach twist. Once, before I left, I walked out to the silo one last time. The police had left it empty, stripped down to the bare metal. I stood inside, staring at the marks on the floor, scuff patterns from the boards that used to conceal the compartments. I whispered a quiet apology, not sure to whom. Maybe to my father for letting it happen here, maybe to those who died. Years later, when I read about Rolf in prison, how he'd stopped speaking entirely, how he'd spend hours just staring at the walls, I felt no pity, only confusion. What drove him to do that? He wasn't insane, not by any clinical definition. He was deliberate, methodical. The detective said he had a fascination with containment, keeping things still, preserved, quiet. He once told Marta that silence was pure. That's what he wanted to hear. Silence. That's why the voices stopped when they arrested him. Sometimes I think about that night, the light near the silo, the footprints in the grain. There's one detail I've never told anyone, not even the police. When I first stepped inside that night, before I noticed the footprints, I saw something else on the floor. A small toy horse, carved from wood. It was identical to one my father used to whittle for local children. I hadn't seen one in years. I picked it up, turned it over, and saw initials carved underneath, R.A., his initials. I still don't understand how it got there. My father had died before Rolf ever came to work for us, or so I thought. But when I asked around later, one of the old neighbors told me Rolf's family had lived near our land long before I was born. He'd been a child when my father owned the farm. Maybe he'd been there before. Maybe he'd never really left. I keep the toy horse in a drawer now. I don't know why I didn't throw it away. Maybe it's a reminder that evil doesn't always look like monsters or strangers. Sometimes it looks like someone who eats at your table, works beside you, and asks about your day with genuine interest. Sometimes it's a man who builds silos and calls them safe. The farm is gone now, turned into industrial land. The silo was demolished years ago. But occasionally, when I pass by that stretch of road, I swear I can still hear something faint on the wind. Not voices, not crying, just a hollow echo, like the sound of grain shifting in a space that's no longer there. And every time, I wonder if it's just memory playing tricks, or if some things, the ones buried in silence, never really stop speaking. It started with a sound check that went wrong. Or maybe it was right too right. I was at the studio late one night, replaying the same harmony line over and over, trying to clean up the audio for a new church choir album. I remember leaning close to the monitor, headphones half off, when I froze. The track I was mixing, Ave Maria, had a voice I didn't record. A pure, sharp tone floated just above the tenors, almost angelic, like a boy's voice breaking through static. But here's the thing, we hadn't recorded a soloist that day, and I knew every member of that choir. Back then, in 1996, I was a sound engineer in Ghent, working for a small recording house near the Street Bavos Cathedral. The choir we recorded was local, mostly teenagers and young adults, led by a proud, eccentric conductor named Willem. That particular week, we were finalizing a charity album. Nothing unusual until that night. The added voice didn't just blend, it completed the piece, like it was always meant to be there. I isolated the track, scrubbing through frequencies, and found it existed only in the left channel. Impossible. The session logs showed no additional input, no mic on that side. I thought it was interference, maybe from a nearby radio station. But the clarity, it was human. The next morning, I played it for Willem. He listened, motionless, his eyes darting back and forth between the meters on the screen. When the voice came in, he swallowed hard. "That's Lucas," he whispered. "That's my solo boy." I laughed it off. Then he must have been here in another take I missed, but Willem shook his head. "No, he's gone. Lucas disappeared 2 months ago. Police never found him." I remember the air leaving the room like a slow leak. I replayed the section again, just to be sure. The voice was pristine, mournful, and unmistakably young. I didn't know Lucas personally, but I had edited enough vocals to recognize a distinct timbre. His was fragile, but disciplined, a sound you couldn't mistake. Willem told me Lucas was 12 when he vanished after practice one evening. His bicycle was found near the canal, but no signs of him. I stared at the waveform, half hoping it would glitch into something logical. It didn't. That night, I stayed in the studio long after everyone left. I wasn't spooked yet, just curious. I opened every session file from the past 3 months. By 2 a.m., I'd found fragments of that same boy's voice in 4 different tracks, each one hidden under layers of sound, as if tucked between frequencies. No one could have noticed it unless they were isolating parts like I was. I should have stopped there, but curiosity is a dangerous thing for an engineer. I started cataloging each sample, labeling them voice fragment 1, fragment 2, and so on. In Kyrie eleison, His hum ran under the sopranos. In Gloria, he whispered faintly during silence between verses, almost like he was counting. When I boosted the levels, it sent chills through me. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then the faint sound of inhaling. I shut everything down. I told myself I was tired, hallucinating, overworked. But the next morning, when I opened the files again, the fragments were gone, deleted, every single one. Only the original choir mix remained. When I confronted Willem, he looked almost relieved, as if he'd expected it. He told me he'd taken the masters home, for safety. That made no sense. He wasn't authorized to handle raw files. But his tone made me drop it. For a few days, things returned to normal. We kept recording other projects, mostly commercials and jingles. Then, 2 weeks later, another client, an independent composer, sent in a track for mastering. I ran the file, and halfway through, I froze. The same boy's voice again. Same tone, same vibrato. It was Lucas. The client hadn't recorded any choir. I checked the file. Metadata. It came from a studio across town, owned by a freelancer named Peter Van Loon. I'd met him a few times at local gigs. A quiet guy, technical genius, bit of an oddball. He specialized in sound texture art, weird, layered compositions that played with human emotion frequencies. I called him up, told him I was impressed by the child's voice he'd added. Peter paused a long time, then said softly, "Ah, yes. Inspiration visits in many forms." I didn't like how he said that. Over the next month, I started hearing that same voice in other random recordings, local ads, choir demos, even an experimental radio piece. It was like Lucas's voice had infected the city's airwaves. I began recording late-night broadcasts just to check. Sometimes, at exactly 3 a.m., a faint boy's singing bled through static brief, haunting, unfinished melodies. I wasn't sleeping much then. My girlfriend left because she said I was married to ghosts. Maybe she was right, but something was happening, and no one cared. One evening, after a studio session, I ran into Willem again outside a pub. He looked thinner, jittery, eyes bloodshot. I told him about hearing Lucas's voice again, about the strange overlaps in new recordings. He laughed dry, bitter. "You think he's haunting us? Don't flatter yourself, Max. Some men just know how to preserve beauty." He left before I could ask what that meant. The next day, I followed my gut and visited Peter's studio. It was in a repurposed warehouse near the edge of town, cold concrete walls, heavy insulation, no windows. The sign outside read, "Van Loon Audio Restoration." I knocked. No answer. I could hear faint music inside, something choral but warped. I waited until someone came out, a delivery guy, and slipped in behind him. The smell hit first, metal, antiseptic, and something sour underneath. I crept through narrow halls lined with soundproof panels. At the end was a control room, glowing, dim blue from computer screens. Peter sat at the desk, headphones on, eyes half closed, conducting invisible musicians with slow, fluid gestures. I stood quietly for a minute, watching him. The sound in the room was unnerving, dozens of children's voices harmonizing in perfect pitch. But there was no rhythm, no instruments, no direction, just layers of voices fading in and out, like a ghostly choir trapped in loops. I finally spoke. "Peter." He turned slowly, startled but not afraid. "Ah, Max," he said, smiling faintly. "You heard them, didn't you?" I asked him where he got those voices. He pointed to a shelf behind him. Dozens of glass jars lined it, filled with some kind of clear liquid. Each jar had a handwritten label. Soprano A, tenor B, Lucas. My stomach dropped. "You're joking," I said. "Please tell me this is a sick joke." He didn't respond. He just turned back to the console and played another track. The voice was Lucas. Again, undeniably him, but it was different this time. The pitch was too steady, too perfect, like an algorithm. Perfection, Peter whispered. Do you know how many voices decay? How many souls lose pitch with fear? Not Lucas. He sings forever. I lunged for the power switch, but he grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Don't destroy art, he hissed. I shoved him off and ran. I went straight to the police, babbling about jars and recordings and missing boys. They humored me but found nothing. When they searched his studio, the shelves were empty. No jars, no illegal equipment, just standard audio tools. Peter claimed I'd had a breakdown. They believed him. I almost started to believe him too until the next week, when Lucas's mother came to the studio asking for help. She said someone had mailed her a cassette tape with her son's voice singing their old lullaby. The envelope had no return address, but inside was a note. His song is immortal. Now, I played the tape myself. It wasn't just Lucas's voice, it was him trying to speak between verses. You could hear his breath faltering, whispering, "It hurts. Please stop." The recording cut abruptly after that. I tried going back to Peter's studio, but it was sealed off, abandoned overnight. Police said he'd moved to France, but he didn't leave empty-handed. Reports started surfacing in nearby cities, children disappearing, strange audio art installations playing real human voices, and one particularly disturbing exhibit titled The Choir Eternal. Every piece featured a single sound engineer's signature in the metadata, PVL. Years passed. I left Ghent, moved to Antwerp, tried to rebuild my life. But even there, I'd occasionally hear that tone, a perfect, pure note, in the background of commercials, church broadcasts, even phone hold music. Once, in a supermarket, the radio started playing an ambient piece that made my hands tremble. I could tell instantly. Lucas's voice was layered into it. I left my groceries and walked out. I tried to drown it all out, to convince myself it was coincidence. Until one morning, while editing an unrelated recording, I found a file I hadn't created. The timestamp said, autosave 4:03 a.m. A time I hadn't been awake. I opened it. The waveform looked ordinary, so I pressed play. There was silence for a few seconds, then a faint inhale. Then, clear as daylight, a voice said, "You found me again, Max." I dropped my headphones. I didn't touch that computer for days. When I finally powered it on again, the file was gone. No trace, no logs, no auto backup. I formatted everything. Months later, I received a postcard from France. No return address, just a photo of a small studio near Lyon. On the back, it read, "Perfection Travels, you should visit." The handwriting matched Peter's. I burned it, but I can still see the neat loops of his letters in my head. I kept quiet for years after that, until the police finally contacted me again just last year. They'd found remains in a flooded basement outside Ghent, including jars with preserved human tissue. The forensic report said most were vocal cords. Some belonging to children reported missing between 1,994 and 1,997. Each jar had a number etched into the glass. The highest was 27. They asked if I could identify anything. I said no, but when they showed me one photo, my stomach twisted. The handwriting on the label's small, careful cursive read, "Lucas, angelic clarity." I thought I'd feel closure knowing Peter was gone. He'd apparently died in that same flood, his body unclaimed. But closure isn't what came, because just 2 nights ago, while cleaning out old tapes, I found one I didn't recognize, unlabeled, dusty, tucked behind a drawer. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I played it. The first few seconds were static. Then that same boy's voice filled the room, crisp as the day I first heard it. He sang one long, trembling note that faded into a whisper, "Help me." Then silence. I sat there for what felt like hours, unable to move, replaying it over and over. The final seconds had faint background noise, someone breathing. Not Lucas this time. It was heavier, closer to the mic. I boosted the gain slightly, just enough to catch a single word murmured beneath the boy's fading voice. Perfect. That was yesterday. I haven't slept since. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that single word, over and over, adjusting its tone like someone testing levels. My speakers click on by themselves at night now, playing faint hums that rise into unhuman harmonies. I unplug them, and still, I hear it through the walls. I keep thinking about something Peter once said, right before I ran out of his studio, that voices decay when souls lose pitch. Maybe that's why Lucas keeps singing. Maybe that's why I can't stop hearing him. And maybe, somewhere in all this noise, Peter's still conducting, waiting for one last perfect note. I never wanted the night shifts, but they paid better, and at Solsiden Elderly Care in Bergen, no one fought for them. It wasn't a bad place, quiet, clean, a little too sterile, but after midnight, the silence turned heavy, like the walls were holding their breath. I'd been there for 6 months when Nurse Liv began joining my rounds. She was older than me by about 15 years, calm, soft-spoken, with that serene patience every good nurse seemed to have. At first, I admired her. She always knew how to comfort the residents when they panicked at night or whispered about seeing things that weren't there. But as time went on, something about her calm began to feel rehearsed. The first time I noticed it was with Mr. Henningsen, a man in his 80s who still remembered everyone's birthdays even though he could barely stand. He'd been in stable condition for weeks. That night, he asked for water, and when I came back, Liv was already in his room, leaning over him, whispering something. I didn't interrupt. I just waited by the door. She placed her hand over his chest, as if soothing him, but his breathing changed shallow, then slower until it just stopped. The monitors didn't beep because he wasn't hooked to one. We were short on machines that week. I froze, unsure what to do, and Liv turned around with that same soft smile and said, "He went peacefully." She brushed her hand over his hair, straightened the blanket, and told me to log the time. 2:47 a.m. It should have ended there, but something bothered me. The next day, while doing paperwork, I noticed a small digital recorder on Liv's trolley. When she left for lunch, curiosity got the better of me. I pressed play. At first, it was just breathing, ragged, uneven, fading. Then her voice, barely above a whisper, humming something that sounded like a lullaby. My hands went cold. I turned it off and put it back exactly as it was. I told myself it was a comfort. Recording, maybe something she used for grief counseling. Nurses do strange things to cope with constant death. But when 2 more patients passed peacefully under her care in 1 week, I started keeping notes, times, rooms, even her expressions. Every death was the same, no struggle, no alarm, just silence. She'd close the curtains, ask to handle it personally, and afterward, she always took out that recorder. One night, around 3 a.m., I heard faint singing from her office. I followed the sound and peeked through the glass. She sat at her desk with headphones on, eyes closed, humming along with her own voice through the speakers. The melody was soft, almost beautiful, but underneath it, if you listened closely, were faint gasps and weak pleas for help. I backed away before she noticed me. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the recordings were old palliative therapy sessions? Maybe she was documenting their final words for research? But the explanations collapsed. When I found her in room 12, Mrs. Alstad's room. The old woman had dementia, but was otherwise healthy. Liv was there, holding the patient's hand, whispering something soothing. When she saw me, she smiled and asked me to fetch her clipboard. I turned to go, but then I heard the tone in her voice shift, low and coaxing, almost like a mother to a child. I turned back quietly. Liv had her other hand over the woman's mouth. I froze, too shocked to move. She held it there until the woman stopped moving entirely. Then she whispered, "Rest now," and reached for the recorder on the nightstand. I didn't confront her. I couldn't. Instead, I went straight to the break room and vomited. The smell of disinfectant suddenly felt suffocating. I washed my face and stared at my reflection, wondering if I'd imagined it. But when I returned, the curtains were drawn, and Liv was humming again. She wrote "natural cardiac arrest" on the report without blinking. That night, I barely slept. Over the next few days, I noticed other oddities. She never called the doctor immediately after a death, always waited a few minutes. She sometimes took short trips into the storage room before going to the deceased. I checked the cabinet once when she wasn't around and found an empty vial of morphine and a missing syringe. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to make my stomach twist. I thought about reporting her, but to whom? The supervisor adored her. The residents called her the Angel of Salsidon. No one would believe me, so I did something reckless. The next time she began her night shift, I slipped a small camera pen into my pocket. It was meant for checking medication doses, but it recorded audio too. Around 2 a.m., Liv went into Mr. Strand's room, a cheerful ex-teacher with congestive heart failure but no immediate danger. I followed minutes later, pretending to check his vitals. She was sitting by his bedside, holding his hand, her recorder already on. "It's okay, Henrik," she whispered. "You've done enough." He was half asleep, breathing unevenly. I watched her draw something from her pocket, small, silver, and familiar. A syringe. My pulse spiked. "Liv," I said quietly, stepping closer. She didn't look up. "He's suffering. He's stable," I snapped. She finally met my eyes. "You don't understand. They all want peace. They ask for it." I shook my head. "You're murdering them." Her smile faltered for the first time. Then, in that same calm voice, she said, "You'll understand someday." I backed away, heart pounding, and left the room. I waited outside, shaking, until I heard silence inside. When I went back in, Mr. Strand was gone, lifeless, his mouth slightly open, and the recorder beside him blinking red. I picked it up before she could. I went straight to the staff restroom, locked the door, and pressed play. The recording started with his weak voice. "Is it time?" Then her gentle reply, "Yes, just breathe." The sound of the injection followed, then faint humming, and finally no sound at all. I felt sick. I pocketed the recorder and went straight to the police station at dawn. I told them everything, every detail, every time, every patient. The officer on duty looked skeptical at first, but when I played the tape, his expression changed. They sent 2 detectives that afternoon. I wasn't allowed back into the building during the investigation, but I waited outside anyway, sitting on the steps, trembling in the cold. Hours later, they led Liv out in handcuffs. She didn't resist. She didn't even look at me, just that same placid smile. Days passed before I heard anything. A detective named Rune called to tell me they'd found several recordings in her apartment labeled with dates and names matching the deceased patients. The folder on her computer was titled "Final Breaths." The tracks were stored like songs, complete with metadata. She'd even mixed them with ambient tones and lullaby melodies, calling it her Requiem project. Each file ended exactly at the patient's recorded time of death. They found morphine vials hidden in her kitchen and handwritten lyrics describing songs of release. The police psychiatrist concluded she believed she was freeing, her patients capturing their peace and sound. She'd been doing it for years, transferring between facilities whenever suspicions arose. Bergen was simply her last stage. The case made local headlines for a week. I couldn't bring myself to read the articles. People at the home called her a monster, but part of me still saw the gentle nurse who comforted the dying. That's what made it worse. Her voice haunted me, the softness of it, the way she spoke to them like she cared. I kept hearing it whenever the building went quiet. Just breathe. I quit my job soon after. I told myself I'd never step inside a nursing home again. But months later, I got a message from Rune. He said they were finalizing the evidence and asked if I'd come in one last time to identify an item. I agreed. At the station, he showed me a small USB drive they'd found among her personal effects. "We think it's her backup," he said. I didn't want to hear it, but he played a snippet anyway. It wasn't just patients this time, it was me, my voice. I froze as the sound played, my own breathing, faint footsteps, my whisper saying, "Live." It was from that night outside Mr. Strand's room. "She recorded everything," Rune said quietly. "Even you." My hands trembled. I asked him to stop the playback, but he didn't. What came next made my skin crawl. It was her voice again, whispering, "You'll understand someday." Then a faint hum, low, rhythmic, deliberate. It wasn't just humming anymore, it was melody, my melody. She'd mixed my voice into her project. I left the station shaking, unable to process it. For days, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her calm expression, heard that lullaby looping faintly in my head. I started avoiding music altogether. Even the sound of hospital machinery or ventilators made my chest tighten. I thought it would fade with time, but it didn't. One night, months later, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, there was silence for a few seconds, then that melody. My blood ran cold. It was one of her lullabies, faint, distant, but unmistakable. I hung up immediately. The number was untraceable. I told myself it was a prank, maybe some twisted journalist who got access to the recordings. But when it happened again a week later, I couldn't pretend anymore. The third time, I stayed on the line. The music faded, replaced by her voice. "I told you, you'd understand." My throat went dry. I whispered her name, but the line went dead. I didn't sleep that night. I contacted Rune the next morning, and he swore Liv was still in psychiatric custody. He said she had no access to phones or devices. Still, he sounded uneasy. "We did find one missing file from her backup," he admitted. It was labeled "The Witness." That word still echoes in my head. Witness. Weeks later, I received a package at my apartment. No sender, no note, just a small USB inside. Against my better judgment, I plugged it in. There was only one file. I hesitated, but curiosity won. The title was Final Breaths, Track 27. It started with my voice again. I could hear my panicked breathing, my shoes scraping the floor, the door creaking open. Then her whisper, "Shh, it's okay, you can rest now." The audio slowed, warped, blending my gasps into music until it became something hauntingly melodic. It ended with a long silence, then one final breath. I don't remember ejecting the drive or throwing it away, but I did. I spent that night sitting on the floor, shaking. Every sound felt amplified, the hum of the peeper, refrigerator, the ticking clock, my own pulse. I realized what she'd meant. You'll understand someday. It wasn't a threat, it was a promise. Sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I hear it again, soft humming, faint but close, like someone standing just outside my room. I tell myself it's imagination, trauma replaying itself. But deep down, I know the sound too well. It's her lullaby, looping endlessly, as if she's still recording. And maybe she is. Maybe every breath I take now is just another verse she's waiting to capture. He made us close our eyes that day. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Breathe in, reflect, he said, pacing between our desks like some self-appointed therapist instead of a literature teacher. His voice had that steady calm that made you follow orders, even when your gut told you not to. I remember the sound of his shoes' soft, controlled taps and the smell of chalk dust that always clung to him. Mr. Klein. Everyone called him the mirror teacher, though not to his face. He was the kind of man who could look at you for 3 seconds and make you start confessing things you didn't mean to say. I was 17, awkward, and desperate for approval. He saw that immediately. The reflection sessions started as class projects. He said it was about understanding identity through literature. Each week, he'd pick one student to sit in the mirror, meaning they'd sit in front of the class, while he asked questions that dug deeper than anyone was comfortable with. "Who are you when no one's watching?" he'd ask. "What do you hide behind your smile?" It felt intrusive at first, but he had this way of making you believe it was necessary, even noble. The first student to cry during one of those sessions was Melanie. She broke down, admitting she stole her sister's money. He just smiled, nodded, and whispered, "Good, now we can see you." We all clapped when she finished. I hate that I clapped too. Soon, everyone wanted to be chosen. It was like confession and therapy combined with performance. Mr. Klein would praise whoever broke through. He called it shedding illusions. "The world lies to you," he'd say. "I won't." But every week, his questions got darker. He started bringing a mirror into class, an old freestanding one from the theater department. When it was your turn, you'd have to sit facing it, looking at yourself while he asked things no teacher should ever ask. He'd lean close and whisper, "What do you see when the mask falls?" It didn't feel like learning anymore. It felt like hypnosis. By the time it was my turn, I was terrified. He closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and left only a small desk lamp shining on the mirror. "You're not speaking to me," he said softly. "You're speaking to her." My reflection stared back, pale and unsure. He asked if I'd ever lied to my parents, if I'd ever wanted someone to die, if I'd ever hurt an animal as a child. I tried to laugh it off, but his eyes didn't move. They were fixed on me through the reflection, not directly. "I don't want lies, Clara," he said. "Say what the real you thinks when no one is listening." I felt like my heart was beating in my throat. I said something cruel. I didn't mean just to make it stop. He smiled. "There she is," he whispered, and turned off the lamp. I couldn't stop shaking for the rest of the day. After that, the stalked on. Sessions changed. He started holding them after school, saying he wanted privacy for honesty. A few of us stayed voluntarily, including me. I don't know why. Maybe because he made us feel chosen. Special. He'd lock the door, draw the curtains, and pick one person. He started recording the sessions on an old camcorder, saying it was for psychological study. We believed him because he was so calm, so precise. The way he spoke made you doubt your own discomfort. "I'm not forcing anyone," he'd always say. "You want this." And somehow, we did. The breaking point came with Emma. She was quiet, kind, and the best writer in class. Mr. Klein adored her essays. He said she understood truth. When he chose her for the next session, she smiled nervously but didn't protest. I stayed behind that day because I was helping him set up the camera. He asked me to leave when she arrived, but I hesitated. "Stay," he said suddenly, without looking at me. "You should. See what truth looks like." I stood by the back wall while he told Emma to sit in front of the mirror. The light hit her face harshly, washing out her features. "Who are you?" he asked. "Emma," she said, voice trembling. "No," he said, "that's just a label. Who are you beneath the stories, beneath the pretending?" She didn't answer. "Erase her," he said gently. "Erase the one who lies." I thought he meant metaphorically, but then he handed her a razor blade, a real one. My breath caught. "We all cut away illusions here," he murmured. "Just a line. Just to show you're willing to be honest." She froze, eyes wide, but he knelt beside her, whispering things too softly for me to hear. She nodded once, tears in her eyes. I moved toward them, saying, "This isn't right." But he shot me a look so cold I stopped mid-step. "You'll ruin her progress," he hissed. "She's almost free." When she pressed the blade lightly to her wrist, I screamed. He didn't flinch. He just whispered, "Good girl, now you're beginning." I ran. I don't even remember leaving the room. I think I knocked over a chair and just bolted out into the corridor. My legs felt like rubber. I told the headmaster everything that evening. They suspended Mr. Klein the next day, pending investigation. Emma was taken to the hospital, and we were all interviewed. For a while, it seemed like justice would happen, but the town was small, and Mr. Klein was respected. He denied everything. Said it was a creative exercise gone wrong. Said I was dramatizing. The tapes? They were deleted, he claimed. The camcorder was gone when police searched his classroom. Without proof, they couldn't charge him. Emma's parents moved away 2 months later. She stopped coming to school. Classes resumed, but something in me stayed broken. The next teacher avoided talking about what happened. Everyone pretended it was over. But one night, about 3 weeks after his suspension, I received a tape in my locker. No note, just a VHS with my name written in black marker. I didn't have the nerve to watch it alone, so I asked my friend Daniel to come over. We put it in the old VCR in my parents' living room. The screen showed the classroom mirror. The angle was the same as before. Mr. Klein's voice came from off-camera, calm and deliberate. "Tell us who you are." The student sitting there wasn't Emma. It was me. The footage was from my own session, the one where he'd turned off the lamp. But there were parts I didn't remember. He'd spliced the recording, cutting between moments. My voice sounded distant, cracked. "I hate them," I said at one point. "All of them." Then faintly, his whisper, "That's the truth." But the last few seconds made me sick. The camera zoomed in on my reflection, except it wasn't moving like me. My real self had frozen in the footage, but the reflection turned its head, slightly, delayed, smiling faintly. Then static. Daniel swore it was a trick of the tape, some glitch. But the smile, I still see it when I close my eyes. We brought the tape to the police, but they dismissed it, said it was edited, said it wasn't evidence of anything criminal. I couldn't sleep after that. I kept feeling watched. Every reflective surface in my room, mirrors, windows, even my phone screen felt wrong, like something was lagging behind reality by half a second. I tried covering my mirror with a sheet, but it didn't help. One night, I heard a knock on my window. 3 soft taps. When I pulled the curtain aside, no one was there, just my reflection staring back with that same faint smile. I told myself it was exhaustion, trauma, imagination. But the next day, Daniel went missing. They found his car by the lake. No signs of struggle. Inside was a single note on his dashboard. "I see her now." That same week, Emma's parents reported she'd disappeared from her new home. The police thought she'd run away, but I couldn't ignore the connection. I remembered Mr. Klein's phrase, "Erase her." I went back to the school after hours, to his old classroom. It hadn't been used since. Dust coated everything. The mirror was still there, leaned against the wall. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I felt drawn to it like unfinished business. I turned it upright and stared at my reflection under the flickering fluorescent light. At first, it was just me, paler, thinner, but me. Then the image twitched. My reflection's mouth opened slightly, while mine stayed shut. I froze. The air felt thick, charged. Then, faintly, behind me, I heard his voice. "Truth looks back, Clara." I spun around. Empty room. My pulse hammered in my ears. When I turned back, the reflection wasn't matching me anymore. It tilted its head slowly, the same way Mr. Klein used to when he was studying us. I backed away, tripped on a chair, and crashed to the floor. The mirror didn't fall, it stayed perfectly balanced. I ran. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. Who would believe me? But the nightmares started right after. I'd dream of sitting in that chair again, the mirror in front of me, his voice behind me asking, "Who are you now?" I'd wake up sweating, my reflection still facing forward even after I turned my head. My parents thought it was trauma. They sent me to therapy. The therapist said I was projecting guilt. Maybe I was, but guilt doesn't whisper your name in your own voice when you're brushing your teeth. Months passed. Mr. Klein vanished. Officially, he left the country. The school said he'd resigned voluntarily. The town forgot about him, like small towns do when things get too ugly to discuss. But I never stopped seeing those faces in my dreams. Melanie, Emma, Daniel, all sitting in front of that mirror, repeating the same phrase over and over. I see her now. Sometimes I'd hear them say my name at the end. I avoided mirrors completely after that. I covered every reflective surface in my apartment. But last month, one of my old classmates found me online. He said he'd discovered something in old VHS labeled Session 10. He wanted to meet in person to show me. I told him no. I couldn't go through it again. A few days later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. Me, sitting in that same chair from years ago, but older, exactly as I am now. The mirror behind me showed Mr. Klein standing with his hand on my shoulder. My skin went cold. I tore it up and burned it, but that night, I woke to the faint click of a camera shutter in the dark. You might think it's all in my head. Maybe I want to believe that too. But last week, I went to visit my parents. They'd moved the old furniture around, redecorated the hallway. But when I walked past their bedroom, I froze. The mirror, the same oval frame from my childhood, was back on the Tate wall. And for a split second, I saw him behind me, smiling faintly, before the image caught up and I was alone again. Sometimes I wonder what those sessions were really for. Maybe he wasn't studying us. Maybe he was teaching the reflections. Maybe he taught them how to stay, even after we left the room. Because lately, when I look too long into glass, I swear I can still hear him whisper, calm and certain as ever, "Don't be afraid, you're almost free." I was halfway through my third cup of tea that morning when the call came in about a missing officer. It wasn't unusual. Leeds had its share of chaos. But this one was different. It was Peter, my partner of 6 years. He'd signed off duty 3 nights ago and hadn't been seen since. His car was parked outside his flat, keys inside, wallet untouched. I remember sitting there, holding the phone, feeling my throat tighten as the words, "last seen," kept echoing. Missing officers always hit differently, you know, their habits, their routines, the smell of their coffee, and suddenly, they're just gone. By the second day, the station had turned his desk into a war room. Maps, lists of known offenders, CCTV requests, the usual. I went through every call log and body cam clip from the last week. Nothing. He'd gone off the radar after his haircut appointment. That stood out to me, weirdly. Peter was particular about that. Every other Thursday, 6 p.m., at Mason's Chair. He liked that place, said the barber, was old school but modern enough to fade his hair properly. I didn't think much of it at first, but by the end of the week, when every other lead had turned cold, that barber shop became my obsession. Mason's chair sat at the corner of a narrow lane off Brigate. The place looked vintage, clean, polished mirrors, brass fittings, the kind of shop that smelled faintly of aftershave and hot steel. The sign outside was modest: hair, art, precision. When I walked in, a man looked up from his chair with an easy smile. Mid-30s, tall, thin frame, neatly styled hair that shimmered like glass under the lights. "Afternoon," he said. "You here for a cut or a consult?" I flashed my badge, and his smile barely faltered. "Detective Sergeant Liam Ward, West Yorkshire Police," I said. "You cut Peter Dunn's hair last Thursday, didn't you?" He blinked once, then smiled again. "Oh, Peter, yes, of course. Lovely lad, always polite. Why? Something wrong?" I told him Peter hadn't been seen since that night. Mason's tone softened instantly. "That's terrible," he murmured. I remember he looked tired, though. We had a nice chat about the job, how it wears you down. He said something about needing a break. Maybe he took one? It sounded reasonable, too reasonable. His voice had this calm, calculated rhythm, like he'd rehearsed it. Still, there wasn't enough to press him, so I thanked him and left. But something about the way he watched me through the window as I crossed the street, it stayed with me all day. That same night, I pulled up his file. Mason Ellis, 36, registered cosmetologist, no criminal record, born in Sheffield, moved to Leeds in 2001. A few noise complaints from neighbors, nothing more. The next morning, I went back unofficially. The shop wasn't open yet, so I sat in my car across the street, watching. Around 9, Mason arrived carrying 2 large black bags. He unlocked the door, looked over his shoulder once, and went inside. He didn't switch on the open sign for another hour. When I finally stepped in again, pretending to be a customer, the air inside smelled faintly metallic beneath the cologne. A new haircut poster hung on the wall faces of men and women, but something was off. The hair looked too real, too heavy, too alive. Mason greeted me warmly. "Decided you needed a trim after all?" he asked. I played along. "Yeah, just the sides." I watched his reflection as he moved around me, confident, silent, except for the soft hum of clippers. "You were close with Peter?" he asked suddenly. I nodded. "He was my partner." He paused, blade hovering near my ear, before resuming slowly. "Must be difficult, losing someone you work with." When he finished, he brushed the loose hair off my neck with these gloved fingers, smooth, deliberate. "You've got good hair," he said quietly. "Healthy roots. People don't realize how much personality sits in the strands." It sounded like a compliment, but it made my skin crawl. I paid, left, and spent the next hour in my car again, watching as a young woman walked in and never came out. I waited nearly 2 hours before she finally stepped out, smiling, hair perfect. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe the grief had cracked my head open. But something about Mason's words, personality in the strands, felt wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I pulled up every missing persons case within a 5-mile radius. 18 reports in 5 years, mostly young women and men, all under 40. No patterns except one detail. Each had some connection to the city center, and several had last been seen near Mason's street. 2 days later, I went back with a search warrant. Mason didn't resist. "What's this about?" he asked with an almost amused tone. I told him it was standard procedure, checking CCTV logs, verifying customer data. He nodded and stepped aside, letting us in. His shop was immaculate, every tool gleaming. My team began opening drawers, cabinets, storage boxes. Nothing. until I walked behind the curtained door labeled Art Studio. Inside, mannequins stood in neat rows, dozens of them. Men, women, even children. Their heads were fitted with wigs so realistic they seemed to breathe. Skin-colored caps, lashes, the faint gleam of human oil where synthetic hair shouldn't shine. The air was colder in there, thick with a smell that reminded me of antiseptic and something faintly sweet like decayed flowers. Mason stood behind me, smiling faintly. "My art," he said softly. "Every stylist needs a muse." I stared at the nearest mannequin, a woman with golden curls and a mole under her lip. It took me a second before recognition struck. I'd seen her photo on a bulletin board last year. Missing, age 28. "Where do you get the hair?" I asked, my voice low. He shrugged, gently. "Donations, sometimes estate collections. People sell hair online. It's legal." But when I leaned closer, I noticed something. The roots weren't cut clean. They looked torn, uneven. I called for evidence collection immediately. Mason didn't flinch. As they let him out, he turned to me and said, "You'll understand, someday. Hair remembers people better than skin." 2 days later, forensics confirmed what I feared. The hair was human and matched 5 local missing persons, including 2 cold cases. But not Peter. I clung to that single thread of hope, convincing myself maybe he was still out there. Then one morning, a junior tech handed me a sealed evidence bag with a pale, brown strand. "This one was found in the backroom closet," he said. "We ran it against the officer's toothbrush from his flat. It's a match." My stomach dropped. I requested access to Mason's storage unit, listed in his lease records. It sat behind an old industrial lot on the industrial outskirts of town. When the shutter rolled up, the smell hit us first: chemical, sour, almost sickly sweet. Inside were dozens of mannequin heads stacked on shelves, each tagged with a name. Underneath, a workbench covered with scalp fragments, stitching needles, jars labeled preserved follicle oil. I picked one jar up. Peter's name was written in tidy handwriting across the label. Inside was something pale, floating: his hair, perfectly coiled. My hands began shaking uncontrollably. "Get the photographer in here," I said, my voice barely holding. Mason had been collecting people, preserving them through their hair like trophies. At the trial, he was calm, articulate, polite. "I never killed anyone," he insisted. "I simply used what was already lost. I restored identity. They should thank me." His defense lawyer argued mental instability, claiming Mason had gender dysphoria and deep isolation from years of bullying. The tabloids tore him apart, labeling him the transgender barber. It infuriated me because it wasn't his gender that made him monstrous, it was the cold precision of his obsession. When the verdict came, life imprisonment without parole, I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt hollow. Months passed, and the department moved on. But one evening, about a year later, I received a parcel at my flat. No return address. Inside was a small wooden box, sanded smooth, with my name carved in tiny letters. My pulse spiked as I lifted the lid. Inside lay a wig, short, dark brown, familiar texture. The note beneath it read, "Perfect symmetry this time. You'll wear it well." I reported it immediately. The return label traced back to a private art gallery in Sheffield, one that had once exhibited Mason's Human Expression series before his arrest. When we raided the gallery, the curator swore they hadn't sent it. "We thought you authorized it," he said. "We received a letter from the prison, stamped, official." But the prison denied any mail authorization. 2 weeks later, another box arrived, this one left at the station's front desk. No handwriting this time, just a small wax seal shaped like scissors. Inside, a tuft of blonde hair. Beneath it, a Polaroid photo of me, asleep on my sofa. The photo had been taken through my living room window. I started sleeping with the lights on, the blinds shut tight. Every creak of the building made my chest seize. My colleagues offered protection, but I refused it. I didn't want to admit how terrified I was. That I could feel him near me somehow, like the air held his breath. 3 months after the second package, Mason was found dead in his cell. Apparent suicide, wrist slit with a sharpened comb. When they searched his cell, they found sketches taped to the wall. All of them were drawings of heads bald, featureless, except for one that had eyes, mine. After his death, the boxes stopped. I tried to convince myself it was over, but the nightmares didn't agree. I'd wake up convinced someone was standing at the foot of my bed. Once, I woke to find strands of my own hair on the pillow, perfectly trimmed ends that hadn't been there when I fell asleep. I told myself I was shedding from stress, but deep down, I didn't believe it. Years went by. I left the force in 2011, moved to York, tried to start over. The nightmares faded into something quieter, something I could almost live with. But last year, I walked past a boutique barbershop in a neighboring town, and my breath caught. In the window stood a mannequin male, short dark hair, faint scar over the eyebrow. Mine. The shop name was Ellis & Co. The door was locked, hours listed as by appointment only. When I called the number, a soft voice answered, one that felt both familiar and distant. Ellis & Co. How can I help? I hung up immediately. I don't know if it was my imagination or memory playing tricks, but that voice carried the same calm tone I remembered from Mason's first greeting. Gentle, practiced, precise. Sometimes I wonder if he ever really died. His obsession was too methodical, too thorough to end with one man. Maybe he trained someone. Maybe he left behind instructions. Maybe, in some twisted way, he believed he was passing on an art form. Every few months, I get my hair cut by a barber. I trust someone I've known for years, someone who knows never to keep my trimmings. I watch the strands fall to the floor, small and harmless. But each time, a voice in my head whispers that someone, somewhere, still wants them. That hair remembers. That maybe Mason was right about that much. And when I look in the mirror afterward, I sometimes catch a glimpse of something that doesn't quite belong, a line too neat, a cut too symmetrical, as if someone else's hand finished the job while I wasn't looking. I was halfway through my shift when I noticed something off with the restroom logs. I'd been working nights at that rest stop outside Oaxaca for almost 3 years, and nothing much ever happened after midnight. Truckers came and went, a few late buses stopped for bathroom breaks, and sometimes drunk drivers wandered in for water or to throw up. But that night it was around 2:10 a.m. I remember glancing at the clipboard outside the men's restroom and frowning. Every stall had a log sheet taped inside the door, where drivers were supposed to sign in before cleaning or inspection, just to keep track of hygiene checks. Normally, I'd see scattered signatures, different times, different names. But this time, 5 stalls, 5 identical signatures. J. Rivas, all written within the same minute, 2:07 a.m. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe some bored trucker had decided to mess around while taking a break. But I knew the name. I'd seen it. Earlier that night, on a receipt left at the coffee stand around midnight. A local delivery driver, I guessed lots of them passed through here. Still, it was weird enough that I decided to check the security monitor in the main cleaning room. The restroom cameras didn't show the stalls, obviously, but they covered the entrance hall, sinks, and doors. Around 2:07, one man walked in. Tall, maybe mid-40s, wearing a brown jacket. He carried something in his left hand, keys maybe. He went straight to the first stall on the right, never came out. No one else entered after him. I checked the feed twice, then 3 times. Same thing, no exit. I scrolled forward 20 minutes, 30, an hour. Nobody left that restroom. I even watched myself walk in at 2:10 to clean, saw the mop in my hand, saw me glance toward the stalls, but there was no sign of him. I froze right there in the tiny monitor room, listening to the hum of the fluorescent lights. The air felt too still, like even the crickets outside had stopped. Then, just to convince myself it was nothing, I went back into the restroom. Everything looked normal, too normal. The kind of clean, quiet that makes you second-guess sound itself. The faint smell of disinfectant lingered, mixed with something metallic I couldn't place. I checked the stalls one by one, knocking first, like I always did. The first stall empty, second empty, third nothing, fourth locked. I waited, listening, no movement. Maintenance, I called softly, but nothing. I pushed the door slightly. It was locked from the inside, latch firm. I crouched and looked under. I swear to you, there were no shoes. Just a dark, uneven shadow where feet should have been. I backed away fast, almost tripping over the mop bucket. I told myself maybe the latch was jammed, it happened before. I went to grab my keyring, which had a universal tool for unhooking the stall locks from outside. But before I could use it, I heard the sound of the latch slide open by itself. Just one clean metallic click. I stood frozen, eyes fixed on that door. Slowly, it creaked inward, nobody inside. The toilet lid was down, the log sheet hung neat, and on it, a fresh signature. J. Rivas, 2:11 a.m. I looked at my watch. It was 2:11 exactly. My hands started shaking so bad I almost dropped the pen I'd been holding. I ran back to the cleaning room and replayed the footage. Nothing. The man still hadn't left. The door hadn't even opened on camera. The feed was clean, uninterrupted. I checked the restroom again, this time dragging in the maintenance flashlight I kept for blackouts. The light beam shook in my hand. I scanned the walls, the mirror, the floor under each stall. Then I noticed something faint, shoe prints leading from the entrance toward the last stall. But they didn't go all the way. They just stopped halfway across the tiles, as if the person had vanished mid-step. My first thought was, maybe someone had broken into the ceiling duct, but the vents were too narrow, bolted tight. There was nowhere to go. I decided to radio my coworker, Luis, who was out sweeping near the parking area. He joked at first, said I'd finally cracked after too many graveyard shifts. I told him to come see for himself. When he walked in, I showed him the logs. 5 signatures at 2:07, a 6th at 2:11, all the same handwriting. Luis squinted. Probably a prank, he said, someone looping around fast. But I pointed to the timestamp. 1 man, 1 entry, no exits. Luis's smile faded slowly, like he wanted to keep joking, but couldn't find the words. We went back to the restroom together. Nothing. No footprints now, they were gone, as if wiped clean. Luis checked under the sinks, behind the trash bins, even opened the utility closet. Then he said quietly, "Let's check the outside camera." We went to the exterior feed, showing the walkway behind the rest stop, where the septic maintenance door was located. At 2:12, a few seconds after that last log entry, the security feed glitched static for about 2 seconds. When it cleared, the service door stood wide open. I looked at Luis. "You locked it?" I asked. He nodded. At the start of the shift, we went out there, flashlights cutting through the dark. The smell hit first sour, chemical, the kind that makes your throat tighten. The concrete was damp, and the drain hatch cover was slightly lifted. Luis bent down, trying to move it aside. He managed to push it open enough to see the tunnel below. Black water. The reflection shimmered faintly with light from our flashlights. Then Luis muttered, "Something's written." I knelt beside him. On the inside of the metal hatch, scrawled in thick, wet letters, was the same name, J. Rivas. But it wasn't ink or marker. It looked like oil mixed with blood, still fresh. Luis swore under his breath and backed off, saying, "We should call the supervisor." I didn't disagree, but I wanted proof. First, something to show it wasn't just paranoia. I aimed my flashlight down the tunnel. There were drag marks leading deeper into the dark. Not footprints, more like something heavy being pulled. The tunnel connected to the old septic filtration line, unused since before I started. The system had been sealed years ago. We both knew that. Yet those marks were fresh. Our supervisor, Mateo, arrived 20 minutes later. By then, we'd locked the restroom, shut off the lights, and waited outside near the vending machines. I told him everything. He didn't believe a word until he saw the logs. Then his face changed pale, unreadable. "That name," he said quietly. "You sure you saw it?" I nodded. We both did. Mateo didn't say anything for a while, just stared at the sheet. Finally, he sighed and said, "That driver. He used to work here. Maintenance, long before you." Luis frowned. "Used to?" Mateo hesitated. "He disappeared. After a septic accident about 8 years ago. Fell in during a repair job. They never recovered the body. I didn't sleep after that. Couldn't. My mind kept circling back to the footage. To the man who never left. To that signature appearing after I'd already checked the stall. Mateo told us to finish the shift like nothing happened, said he'd file a report in the morning. But around 4 a.m., when I went back to double-check the locked restroom, the door was ajar again. The smell was stronger now, like wet concrete and rust. I opened it cautiously, holding the flashlight low. The floor was streaked with water, and on every stall door, written neatly where the log sheets hung, was my own name. Repeated over and over in blue ink. Carlos Vega, 4:2 a.m. Even the handwriting matched mine. My knees gave out. I dropped the flashlight. The sound echoed like a slap. Luis came running when he heard me yell. He stopped dead when he saw the doors. "Man, this isn't funny," he whispered. I told him I didn't do it. I showed him my pen. It was dry, capped, untouched. We took photos with his phone. But when we looked at them minutes later, the writing didn't show. Just blank, clean doors. Every picture, every video, gone. Mateo called us both into his office before dawn, told us not to tell anyone. He said corporate would handle it quietly. "You both take tomorrow off," he said. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the tunnel, about those drag marks, around 1 a.m. I drove back, parked near the trucks, and slipped behind the building. The service hatch was closed this time, padlocked. Still, the concrete around it looked wet, like something had been moving underneath. I crouched and put my ear close, faint scraping, rhythmic, like someone dragging metal against stone. Then, faintly, I heard a voice. My name, just my name, whispered in that same calm tone Luis used when we worked side by side. Except it wasn't Luis's voice. It was mine. I jumped back and ran to my car. The next morning, I tried to tell Luis what I'd heard. He didn't show up for work. Mateo said he called in sick. The following day, he didn't answer his phone. His truck was still parked behind the rest stop. Keys on the seat, doors unlocked. The police came later that week. They drained part of the septic line after a maintenance report flagged a blockage. Inside, they found a set of keys, a phone, and a uniform badge, Luis's. The name tag was smeared, but faintly visible under the grime. And beneath it, scratched into the metal surface of the badge, someone had carved the words, "Still here." "They ruled it as an accident," said Luis. "Must have fallen during an inspection." But no one explained why the security footage cut out between 2 and 2:15 that night, or why my name reappeared on the restroom logs again, exactly 1 week later at 2:07 a.m. The same minute as all the others. Mateo showed me the paper, himself before the police took it. Same handwriting, same ink, only one difference. Under my name, a new note had been added. 2 words, small but perfect. Next shift. I quit the next day. Left the keys on Mateo's desk and didn't even collect my last paycheck. The smell from that tunnel followed me home, though the mix of bleach and rot like something trying to climb back up through the drains. For weeks, I'd hear dripping sounds in my apartment bathroom at the exact same time I used to clock in. Always 2:07, always that same slow rhythm. Then, one morning, I found a folded piece of paper under my doormat. Rest stop stationery. The header still faintly stained with disinfectant marks. Inside, there was a single line, inspection log completed. C. Vega. I moved cities after that, changed numbers, changed jobs. I don't tell this story often because people always think I'm making it up, or confusing memories after too many graveyard shifts. But every time I stop for gas at night, I still check the restroom logs, even out of habit. And sometimes, in small towns, far from Oaxaca, I still see that name written near the top of the page. J. Rivas. Different handwriting, different pen, same letters. And once, just once, I saw mine right beneath it. Same date, same minute, 2:07 a.m. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you stuck around until the end, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. As always, I'm looking for more story ideas, so drop a comment below with any themes or experiences you'd like to hear next. Stay safe out there, and until next time, keep your eyes open.